The two stories you're about to hear take place in some of the most remote country in the American West. And they both start the exact same way, with somebody finding a spot so isolated, so untouched, that they think they've got it all to themselves. In the first story, a man takes what he believes is the quietest job in America. 60 ft up alone, watching a forest that nobody else can reach, until the nightly radio calls from the only other person on that mountain start getting stranger and stranger and then stop coming at all. And in the second, 4 fishermen follow a hand-drawn map to a road that spent 50 years at the bottom of a California reservoir. A road that was never supposed to see daylight again. Only 3 of them would walk back out. Now, both of these stories are told by the people who lived them. And fair warning, they are dark. They are disturbing. And once you hear how they end, you're going to think twice about every quiet place you've ever camped. But if you're into scary stories, you're in the right place. We release a few new episodes every week, so subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. And if you like listening on the go or for sleep, be sure to check us out on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Leaving a rating or review helps us grow the show. So, grab a seat, get comfortable, and whatever you do, don't answer the radio after dark. Let's get into it. If you go looking for the official record of what happened, you'll find it. It's public. It says that a seasonal employee of the Forest Service stationed at a lookout tower in a wilderness district in Idaho set fire to federal property in September, causing the total loss of the structure and the ignition of a wildfire that burned a little over 900 acres before containment. It says the employee was recovered by helicopter 2 days later, 6 miles from the tower site, with a shattered leg and moderate exposure. It says he was charged, and it says he accepted responsibility. Every word of that is technically true. And the picture it paints is a lie from top to bottom except for one line. And I want to get that line out of the way right now so you know exactly what kind of story this is. The fire was set intentionally. I said it. I pulled a cord that lit 5 gallons of fuel I had spent 3 days rigging onto my own tower. And then I went off the back of it on a rope, in the dark, in wind, on a leg that had no business holding me. And I stood on the rocks below and watched Tower 14 burn, with something still climbing through it. I've never told anyone the whole thing. Not the investigators, not my family, not the one therapist I tried for a while. Partly because I signed a statement that says something different. Mostly because I watched what the official record did to the only other man who knew. And he had 31 seasons behind his name, and it didn't save him. One more thing before we start. I've changed the tower numbers, the acreage, a few of the dates, and the names. The record is public, but I'm not going to make it easy to find because finding it means finding his family. His name was Ryan. I want you to remember that name because this story is his as much as mine, and he doesn't get to tell it. Point is, I'm going to tell you what actually happened up there. All of it in order, and I'm going to ask you to do one thing while you listen, which is to keep in mind what I did for a living before any of this because it matters. I fought fire for 9 years. Hotshot crew, the last 6 of them. If you don't know what that means, it means I was on a 20-person hand crew that got sent to the worst part of whatever was burning in the western United States between May and October. It's the closest thing to a professional athlete the Forest Service employs. You dig line, you cut timber, you burn out fuel ahead of a fire so it starves when it arrives. And you learn in your hands and your lungs, not out of a book. Exactly how fire moves, what it eats, and what it does in wind. I was good at it. I was planning to be doing it still. Then 2 seasons before all this, on a burnout operation in Oregon, a dead lodge pole came down where the Sawyer said it wouldn't, and I didn't get all the way clear. It caught my left leg between itself and a stump. I'll spare you the details. The short version is 19 weeks of hardware and rehab, And at the end of it, a leg that works fine for walking on flat ground and turns into a liability on anything steep, anything fast, anything that matters. I couldn't pass the pack test anymore. The crew was done for me. The district owed me, though, and everybody knew it. And that's how a broken hotshot ends up with the one job in fire where you never have to run. 60 FT in the air watching for smoke. I want to be honest about something. When they offered me the lookout position, I was relieved. Not just about the paycheck. I wanted the quiet. I'd spent 9 seasons living in the loudest places on Earth. Saw work and helicopters and wind-driven fire, 20 guys in a buggy, radios that never stop. I like the idea of a summer where the only sound was weather. I told my mom on the phone that I was looking forward to being bored, and I meant it. I want you to hold on to that because it's the last thing in this story I got completely wrong. The quiet up there wasn't empty. It was occupied. The district I worked sits in central Idaho, and I'm not going to be more specific than that for reasons that will make sense by the end. It's designated wilderness, which means no roads, no vehicles, no chainsaws even. Everything that comes in on foot, on a mule string, or under a helicopter. My tower was a 14-4 FT cab on 4 galvanized steel legs, 60 FT off a granite knob with a catwalk running around the outside and one way up the east side. 3 bolted 20 FT steel ladder sections with narrow wooden rest landings between them. Inside a bed, a propane fridge, a small propane wall heater, a 2-burner stove, a table, a radio, and in the dead center of the room on a pedestal, an Osborne firefinder, which is a sighting instrument invented over 100 years ago that we still use because nobody has ever built anything better for the job. The job itself is simple to describe. You look at several 100,000 acres of timber all day, every day, and you learn what it's supposed to look so well that when one pixel of it changes, a smudge, a haze, a little gray feather coming up out of a drainage, you see it inside of minutes. Then you put the firefinder on it, shoot an azimuth, estimate the legal description, and call it down to dispatch. In a dry year, you might catch 15 or 20 fires a season. Every one of them you catch when it's the size of a kitchen table instead of the size of a county. That's the whole reason the towers exist. There used to be 9 manned towers in that district. The year I'm telling you about, there were 2. Cameras took the rest. Mounted detection cameras with software that scans for smoke. Cheaper than a human. No pension. The 2 towers still staffed were mine. 14 and 1 other. 11 mi north across a big drainage, Tower 9. Tower 9 was Ryan. Ryan was 64 years old, and that summer was his 31st season in a lookout. 31. I'd never heard of anything close to that. He'd been a logger and then a smoke jumper for a short while in the 70s. He'd tell you the smoke jumping lasted, in his words, 4 jumps and 1 landing. And then he found the towers and never left. He'd been at 9 so long that dispatch would sometimes just say, "Call Ryan," instead of "Call 9. He kept an old blue heeler up there with him, name of Boone, which was against about 4 different regulations, and every district ranger for 2 decades had developed a professional inability to notice the dog. The first time I ever talked to him was over the radio my second evening in the tower. And the first thing he ever said to me was 14. "This is 9. You getting sunsets over there? Or is your window dirty?" Lookouts do a check-in at the end of the day. It's not official protocol so much as it is a tradition older than the radios from back when it was done with mirrors and Morse. Last light after the final weather observation goes down to dispatch. The towers talk to each other. Ours was at 9 in the evening. Every night all summer at 9, Ryan and I got on the district's secondary channel and talked for anywhere from 2 minutes to an hour. I know how that sounds. 2 grown men 11 mi apart scheduling a nightly phone call. But when you live alone on a rock, that voice at 9 mi stops being a courtesy pretty fast. It becomes something you need. Ryan knew that better than anyone alive. And I understand now that those calls at the start were mostly him doing for a rookie what somebody had once done for him. He taught me the country over that radio, which drainages made their own weather, where the elk came through in June, and where they'd be by August, which cabins down in the river corridor were occupied, and which were rot. He talked about Boone constantly. He was funny in a dry, patient way that took a week to calibrate to, and he swore with genuine craftsmanship. And I liked him enormously before I ever saw his face. And I want to be fair to the truth here, which is that June was good. Whatever else I tell you tonight, that first month was one of the best of my life. My leg didn't matter 60 ft in the air. I woke at 5, did my weather, watched storms build over country that didn't know I existed, read paperbacks, ate terribly, and talked to Ryan at 9. I was healing in a way I hadn't managed for 2 years. But then, and I'm going to place this exactly because I've had a long time to go back over the timeline. The last week of June is when the first wrong thing happened, and at the time it registered as nothing at all. It was during our check-in. Ryan was running down his day, and somewhere in the middle of it, he said, "Elk have cleared out of my drainage, by the way, all of them." I said something about early hunters or wolves. "No," he said, "it's the wrong month for it. They come off the sieving grounds through here mid-June and they trickle through into August. 30 years. That's the schedule. This year they came through in 9 days all at once, moving. Then nothing." He paused and I heard him take a drink of something. "Forest's quiet on my north side. Been quiet about 2 weeks." "Quiet how?" No birds in the morning." He said, "Some days, not every day. You'll be sitting there and realize you're not hearing anything, and you can't remember when it stopped." I told him it was probably the dry year. Animals shift with the water. He agreed that it was probably the dry year, in the tone of a man agreeing that it was probably the dry year because the alternative was to keep talking about it. And we moved on to something else, and I forgot the entire exchange for almost 3 weeks. Here's the thing about a fire lookout, though. The whole job is noticing when the picture changes. He'd been reading that particular picture for 31 years. The second wrong thing I found myself, and I found it on the ground. There was a spring about 1/3 of a mile below my tower down slope to the northeast, and twice a week I'd take 2 water jugs down and fill them because packing water beats hauling it under a helicopter. It was the only walking my leg tolerated happily. And I'd usually make a slow loop of it and pick up firewood on the way back for the pit at the base of the tower. Second week of July, on the way down to the spring, I came around a granite outcrop I'd passed 20 times and stopped because the woods on the other side of it were wrong. 4 lodgepole pines, each of them thicker through than my thigh, had been snapped. Not blown down, snapped. All 4 at a height of about 8 feet. The tops folded over and down, and the tops hadn't just fallen where gravity took them. They were leaned in toward each other and crossed 2 over 2 into a rough structure taller than a man with the butt ends seated against the standing trunks. I stood there a while. I took pictures on my phone. I remember squatting down to look at the break on the nearest one, and the wood was green inside, pale and wet. Recent lodgepole snaps in wind. Sure, but wind takes the weak ones scattered, pointing the direction the gust ran. It does not take 4 healthy trees in a 10ft circle and stack them. I'm going to tell you what I decided standing there because the entire first half of this story is me doing what I'm about to describe, and I want you to watch me do it. I decided it was snow load. A wet spring dump months back, bending them till they failed. And the crossing of the tops was chance, and the green wood meant less than I thought because I'm not a botanist. The clearing smelled wrong too. Wet hide, crushed green wood, and something older underneath. And I decided an elk had been bedding close by. I decided all of it. I filled my jugs and I walked back up to my tower. That is a reasonable explanation. I was a reasonable man. I want you to remember this spot on the mountain, though. The outcrop, the spring, the northeast slope below my tower. We're going to be back here at the end. July went on. The season dried in. My days filled up with actual work. We had lightning cells tracking through every few afternoons, and I caught my first 2 smokes that month. Both of them single tree strikes that crews picked up small. Ryan caught 3. He'd call his down to dispatch in this bored, courteous voice, an azimuth and a description and a good afternoon. And then at 9, he'd walk me through how he'd spotted it in a way that taught me something every single time. But the 9:00 calls were changing. It took me a while to see it because it happened by degrees and because Ryan was Ryan. Nothing rattled the man, and his voice stayed level all the way through everything I'm about to tell you. It started with the dog. Boone won't come out on the catwalk with me anymore. He said one night, middle of July, evenings, he's fine all day, out and around, does his business. Patrols for chipmunks. Sun starts dropping and he goes under the bed, and that's him till morning. Something get after him. Coyotes. He's been ignoring coyotes for 11 years. A pause. He doesn't whine. That's the part I keep chewing on. He's not scared the way a dog gets scared at a noise. He just relocates every night now. Under the bed, nose out, watching the door. I said, dogs get old and strange. Ryan allowed that they did. 2 check-ins later, he told me about the tree line. He said it the way he'd report a smoke. Coordinates first, no wind up. Had something stand at my tree line last night, northwest side, where the meadow comes up to the timber. It was there when I did my last glass of the evening, and it was there 2 hours after full dark when I finally quit looking. Something elk. It was upright the whole time. Ryan said 2 hours 14. It stood at the edge of the trees without moving for 2 hours. I put the binoculars on it before I lost the light. And I'll tell you exactly what I saw, which is a shape. Dark, upright, wide. It was standing in the shadow of the timber, and it did not step out of that shadow, and I want to say it was 7 FT, and I know the ground over there. So when I say it was more than 7 FT, I've done the math against the trees it was standing next to. I remember I laughed, not at him. It was the laugh you produce when a conversation goes somewhere your body isn't ready for. I said, "You're telling me you've got a bear that likes you?" "Could be a bear." He said, "Level as ever. Bears stand for a minute. For 5. If there's a smell working. Not for 2 hours. And not still. Bears are never still." Whatever this was, it had a project. And the project was my tower. Then, before I could answer, he moved on to the weather forecast, and that was that. He'd said his piece. 31 seasons of watching one piece of country, and he'd said it in the same voice he used for relative humidity readings. Here's the thing. If Ryan had sounded scared, I think I'd have found it easier to dismiss all of it. Scared men embellish. Ryan sounded interested. He sounded the way a man sounds when a picture he has been reading for 3 decades shows him something new. And some part of me understood even then that his interest was worse than fear. Because his interest meant his 31 years of baseline had already voted. And then, at the very end of July, came the check-in I think about most. He was quieter that night, shorter answers, and near the end with no setup he said, "Whatever it is, it knows the schedule." Say again. "It knows the schedule," Ryan said. "It shows up after my last weather goes down to dispatch. Not around then. After. And it's gone before first light, before my morning obese. It is never in that meadow during working hours. 14. Not once. And I've started varying my times to check. And here's what I've got for you. The night I sent my last weather 40 minutes late, it showed up 40 minutes late." The radio hissed between us for a second. "That's a coincidence with a sample size of 1, I said. "It is," he agreed. "I'll keep sampling. I didn't sleep well that night, and I want to be precise about why, because it wasn't fear yet. I lay in my bunk doing the thing you do. assembling innocent explanations, and I noticed that my explanations had started requiring more moving parts than the thing they were explaining. That's a threshold, and a man who works around hazards for a living learns to respect it. The simple explanation was becoming the bad one. 2 nights later, it stopped being Ryan's problem alone. I was asleep. It was somewhere past 2 out in the morning. I know because I looked at my watch immediately after, and I looked immediately after because what woke me was not a sound you sleep through. It was a single impact from below, wood against steel, and it was enormous. The whole cab rang, not shook, rang the way 60 ft of galvanized structure rings when it struck. A deep tone I felt in the bed frame and the floor, and the fillings of my teeth. Rolling up the legs and out through the catwalk grating. I was up with the flashlight before I was fully awake. Out the door onto the catwalk, sweeping the ground. 60 ft down, the granite knob and the grass around it sat empty in the beam. The firewood pit, the cash box, the first rank of trees 40 yards out, and nothing between here and there. No movement, no eyes shine, no sound at all. And I registered standing there in the dark in my socks, that no sound at all was itself the wrong sound. There's always something. There was nothing. The mountain had gone completely silent. All of it at once. And I stood on that catwalk maybe 20 minutes, sweeping the same empty ground, my heart going hard and steady. And whatever had put a tone through 60 ft of steel was inside the tree-ine, watching me do it. I couldn't have told you how I knew that. I knew it anyway. In the morning, I climbed down and found 2 things. The first was a dent. Northeast leg about 5 ft off the ground in the steel channel of the strut brace. A dent the length of my hand with galvanizing flaked off around it and bright metal showing. I put my fingers in it. Steel channel. I've swung tools my whole working life, and I'm telling you, I could not put that mark in that steel with a sledgehammer and a running start. The second thing lay in the grass 10 ft away, a piece of green lodgepole limb, thick as my forearm and about 4 tees long. One end was ragged where it had been torn from the tree. Torn, not cut, not broken, across a knee. The bark at the middle of it was crushed flat and darkened in a band, and I stood there turning it over in the sun for a long time before I let myself finish the thought. The band was a grip. Something had torn a limb the thickness of my forearm off a tree, carried it 40 yards into the open, and swung it against my tower one time, hard enough to wring the structure end to end one time. Then it had put nothing else wrong in the world. No tracks I could find in the grass, no scat, no hair on the strut, and gone. I did the drill. I stood at the base of my own tower and produced the innocent explanations one at a time. And for the first time in the story, I watched every single one of them fail on contact. Bear's mark and claw and bite. Bears do not fetch tools. Elk and moose leave a wreckage of sign. A person 11 mi from the nearest road on a straight line, and better than twice that by trail in the middle of the night, swinging a limb at a fed's tower for fun, was possible in the way that most things are technically possible. Only none of it held. I stood there holding a piece of wood with a grip crushed into it, wearing out explanation after explanation. And underneath the reasoning, quiet and patient, sat the thing Ryan had already told me. It knows the schedule. I hadn't done my morning weather yet. It was early. Nothing had ever come near my tower during working hours either. That night at 9, I told Ryan all of it. The impact, the dent, the limb, the grip mark. He listened the whole way through without a word. And when I finished, the pause before he answered went on long enough that I checked my squelch. Then he said, 14. Write your times down. Everything from tonight on. Times, weather calls, when your lights go on and off. Keep a log. I keep a log. It's the whole job. Not the district log, Ryan said. Your own. Keep it somewhere that isn't paper and back it up when you get signal. Then he said the other thing. The thing I didn't understand until the end of August, and I'm going to leave it with you here, just the way he left it with me. And from here on out, after dark, if dispatch calls you, let it go to the second hail before you answer or don't answer at all. Why? Long pause. Because I don't think it can see us in here at night, Ryan said. I think it hears us. I think it's been learning what the sounds mean, and I'd rather it didn't know for sure when you're home. The first week of August, Ryan missed a check-in. 9 came and went. I hailed 9 3 times over 20 minutes and got dead air, and I sat with the mic in my hand, telling myself all the ordinary things. Radios fail. Batteries fail. A man can be asleep at 9 how. But Ryan had not missed a 9 han in the 60-some nights I'd been on that mountain. And so, at 9:40, I did the thing you're supposed to do, which is call dispatch on the primary and ask casually whether they'd had traffic from 9 that day. The dispatcher evening shift, a voice I knew, didn't even have to check. 9 called in sick this morning, she said, took himself out of service for the day. You need something rooted? I said. No thanks. Just checking. Good night. And I felt better. For exactly one day, I felt better, because the next night at 9 Ryan was back on the secondary, sounding completely normal. And when I said I'd heard he was sick, the channel went quiet in a way I have come to hate. I wasn't sick, Ryan said. 14. I was deaf and dumb all day yesterday. The base antenna feed had backed off at the connector where the line comes off the mast, finger loose, and the whip antenna is gone off my handheld. Gone. I've turned this cab over twice, and it is not here. I didn't have either set working until this afternoon. Okay, I said. So, dispatch got their days crossed. You went out of service when you found the fault. I never talked to dispatch, he said. That's what I'm telling you. I had no comms from evening OBs 2 nights ago until this afternoon. I called nobody. Somebody called them? I actually argued with him. I want that on the record because it's the last time in this story I took the other side. I told him dispatch logs a call sign, not a voice print. Someone else's traffic got written down wrong. A clerical slip, a busy morning, 100 boring answers. And Ryan let me get all the way to the end of it. And then he asked me one question in the same voice he used for smoke reports, which is easier to believe. 14. That dispatch invented a sick call out of a quiet morning, wrote it against the right tower on the one day in 31 years my antenna lead unscrewed itself. Or that the timing isn't a coincidence and I lost comms because losing comms was the point, and the sick call bought a day where nobody would come looking. You're describing a plan, I said. Animals don't run interference on dispatch. I know, Ryan said. I know what I'm describing. And then, after a moment, Boone didn't eat yesterday. First time in 11 years. I didn't sleep much that night either. And the next morning, I did something that wasn't my job. I asked dispatch for a day down tower. Personal errand, I called it. And I got my pack, and I started walking to Tower 9. 11 mem. I need to explain what 11 me meant because 2 years earlier it would have meant nothing. I once did 28 M's in a shift with a saw on my shoulder, but the leg the lodgepole left me changes the math on broken ground. Downhill is the worst. Every step down is a small negotiation, and the trail between our towers drops 1,800 ft into the drainage before it climbs 2,200 out the other side. I gave myself the full day. I carried water, a satellite messenger, and for the first time all summer, I carried the district's shotgun down from the tower, and I felt embarrassed about it for the first mile, and stopped feeling embarrassed after what happened at mile 6. What happened at mile 6 was weather on its face. A cell built over the divide around noon earlier than forecast, dry lightning cracking on the ridges. And dispatch put out a standby for all personnel and then singled me out by name. Get back to 14. Both towers staffed by evening. fire weather. That was legitimate. That was even correct. I stood in the trail with thunder rolling around the drainage, and I looked north toward 9 for a long moment. And then I turned around, because I'm a company man, and because a career of training says, you go where dispatch sends you. The walk back is the part I need you to sit with. 6 miles of trail I had walked that same morning. My own boot prints were still crisp in the tread dust going the other way. You learn your own boots? The lug pattern? The wear on the outside heel. For about 2 miles I walked beside my own morning self. And it was somewhere in the middle of that stretch, coming down a straight section through old-growth fur, that I stopped walking. There was another set of prints beside mine, bare in the dust and in the dark dirt where the trail cut spring seep printed clean. A barefoot, 5 toes, a heel, an arch that barely lifted. I stood over the first one for a while, and then I did what I do, which is measure things. I carry a cloth tape in my pack the way some men carry a knife. 9 years of sizing up timber does that to you. 16 1 10 or 2 in heel to toe. My boot beside it is 12 and change, and my boot looked wrong next to it. Undersized. Then I did the worst measurement. I ran the tape between prints left heel to left heel and got 52 in. And I stood up and looked down that straight stretch of trail and made myself understand what 52 in means. That's the stride of something walking, not running. The prints were even, unhurried, weight settled through the heel. Something with legs long enough to stroll at 52 in had come up this trail behind me and my prints at a walk. And here is the detail that took the temperature of the whole day down. The one I will never forget. The bare prints were pressed deeper than mine. I had come through that seep the same morning with a loaded pack, and the bare prints beside mine went a knuckle deeper into the same dirt. I put my fingers in one down to the second knuckle, and the prints swallowed them, and I knelt there in the middle of the trail, doing dead load arithmetic in my head. And the number I kept arriving at had 3 digits, and the first digit was not a 1. I want the geometry of this on the record because it matters. I was walking south toward home, and both sets of prints under me pointed north. My boots from the morning, and beside them, matching them stride for stride, the bare feet. Something had come up that trail behind me in my own tracks while I walked it. The prints ran beside mine for just under 2 miles. I know because I walked every yard of them with the shotgun in both hands and my pulse behind my eyes. Then, at a granite rib where the trail bends, the bare prints angled off into the duff and were gone. Not faded, gone the way tracks end when the ground stops taking them. They had left the trail headed north toward 9. I got back to my tower with the last of the light ahead of the storm. And at 9, I keyed the secondary and told Ryan everything, the prints, the numbers, the 2 miles where they left. And Ryan was quiet. And this silence was different from his others. This one felt occupied. I can't put it better than that. When he finally spoke, his voice stayed level, the same as always. And what it said was this: 16 and a half. Yeah. Mine casts out at 17. Ryan said, I've got 6 of them. 14 plaster in a footlocker under my bunk. Oldest ones, 4 seasons back. He let that sit for a second, and then 31 years of a man's life came down the radio at me in about 5 sentences. It's been on my north side 4 summers now. It had rules. It never crossed the meadow. It never touched the tower. And it never ever showed itself twice in a week. I figured we had an arrangement. Me in my box, it in the trees. Both of us watching the same country. A breath. This year it's not keeping to any of that. Something's changed, and I don't think it's changed on my side. We should call this in. I said together. 2 towers. Same account. And say what? Ryan said. Not a question. He'd had 31 years to run that call in his head, and I had nothing to send back down the radio at him. And the storm broke over the drainage, and that was the last easy night either of us had. I need to slow down now because the second week of August is where this story earns whatever it is you're feeling. And because it's the last stretch of it that has Ryan in it, the check-ins turned into something else that week. Less talk, more report. Ryan had gone fully operational. Times, positions, behavior, the way he'd log a fire. And what he was logging was this. The thing had stopped hiding. It was at the meadow again last night. Third night running, he told me, on a Monday. It stopped caring about the schedule. Stood in the open in the last of the light. 14. I got the glasses on it for a full minute before the light died. And I'm going to say this once plainly, so you have it from me and not from your imagination. It's not a bear. It's between 9 and 10 FT. It's built through the shoulders wider than a doorframe. Dark. And it stands with its arms off its sides the way a man stands when his arms are too big for hanging straight. And it was looking at my window. Not at the tower. At the window I was standing in. It knows what windows are. Tuesday. It broke my ladder in the night. Bottom section. The ladder up my east leg is 3 bolted sections and the bottom one is torn off the stringers, and it's lying about 50 FT out in the meadow. Bent. I'm going to need a maintenance flight. A pause. I want you to think about what it means that it took the bottom one. I did think about it. The bottom section of a tower ladder is 20 FT of steel. With it gone, Ryan could not come down, and nothing on the ground could go up. Both of those facts were true at the same time. And I remember standing at my window, looking north across 11 mi of timber, working out which of the two facts was the intended one, and not liking either answer because both answers meant it thought in terms of later. Wednesday, Ryan's voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. Not fear, even then. Fatigue. The man was 64 and he wasn't sleeping. It was under the tower last night, he said. Under it. I lay in my bunk and listened to it move around the legs for 2 hours. It doesn't step on sticks. 14. A thing that size, and the only way I could track it was Boone's nose. That dog lay under my bunk pointing at it through the floor all night, turning as it circled the legs. And then he said quieter. It touched the leg with the ladder just once, laid something against the steel, and let it ring real soft. One note. I believe that was for me. Thursday, he told me the maintenance flight was scheduled for the next morning. A helicopter would sling in a replacement ladder section and a 2-man crew. And this part he'd fought for and won. They'd fly him and Boone out on the return leg. Season's over for me, he said. First one I've never finished. The ranger thinks I'm sick and I let him think it. 14. Listen to me now. And his voice came down the radio slower, spaced. A man dictating something he needed received. When I'm out, you request an escort down and you end your season 2. Don't finish. The cameras can have this year. Whatever's holding it 4 summers on my side of the drainage, it's spending that patience. Towers 9 and 14 are the last 2 lit windows in this whole country, and I'm about to turn mine off. A long breath of static. And after dark, stop answering your radio. I mean it this time. If it's me, I'll hail you twice, count 10, and hail twice again. Anything else? You let it die in the air. I said a lot of things then that I'd give years of my life to have back. I said I'd see him at the airbase. I said first rounds on the rookie. He laughed, and the last thing Ryan ever said to me at 9:41 on a Thursday night in August was, "Keep your eyes on your own country, 14. It's been watching you longer than you think." Then 9 out. Then the hiss. Friday. 9, cussed. Nothing. I told myself the flight went. I told myself he was at the airbase or a motel standing Boone the first cheeseburger of retirement, but I hadn't heard a helicopter all day. Sound carries a long way to a man who spent 9 years working under rotors, and the drainage had been silent. And at 9:20 I broke my own rule, and called dispatch and asked whether 9's maintenance flight had flown. Keys clicking. Then 9 came out on this morning's flight. He's off the board. Resigned effective today. Actually, personnel's got it. You're our only tower now. 14. You need anything? Resigned. 31 seasons. And the word they had for it was resigned. I sat with the mic in my hand, and every instinct I owned told me the shape of that sentence was wrong. The flight I never heard. The resignation Ryan had never once said out loud. The tidy way the file got closed. But it's dispatch. Dispatch is as official as the world gets. And it was telling me my friend was safe in the valley. And I made the decision I have to live with, which is that I chose to be comforted. I said, thanks and good night. And I racked the mic. There is one more thing about that weekend, and I have never said it out loud before tonight. Saturday, sometime 2 in the morning, my radio broke squelch. One hail, 14-9. Ryan's voice. Then nothing. No count of 10. No second pair of hails. I sat up in the dark with my hand an inch off the mic for a long, long time, and I did exactly what he taught me. I let it die in the air. I've had years to sort out what that was. Old traffic skipping off the atmosphere. A dream I furnished with details afterward, or the other thing. I know which one I believe, and I won't pretend otherwise. I believe something tried the door of my tower that night with my friend's voice before anyone in the valley even knew to miss him. And the only reason it didn't open is that Ryan had already taught me the knock. You already know, because I told you at the start that the official record lies in complete sentences. I'll give you the truth of that Friday now instead of making you wait for it, because Ryan waited long enough. No helicopter flew that morning. The flight had weathered out at the airbase and been pushed 3 days. And an overworked front desk holding a rebooked flight and a lookout's end-of-season paperwork in the same folder closed the file early. Clerical. That's the whole explanation on the world side of it. For 3 days, everyone in the valley believed Ryan was out, and everyone on the mountain knew the only other lit window had gone dark. And the only living things that knew Tower 9 was still occupied that weekend were Ryan. With 20 feet of his ladder lying in the meadow and Boone underneath his bunk, and the thing that took the ladder. When the maintenance crew finally flew on Monday, they found Tower 9 standing open and Ryan at the base of it. The report says he fell. 64Y old man, steep steps. A missing ladder section he had reported himself. It wrote itself. And I want to be careful here because I wasn't there. And I'm not going to invent his last night for you. And I'm not going to describe what a 60-oot fall does to a man I loved. I'll give you only the 3 details from that report that I cannot make lie down, and you can carry them the way I do. His comms were gone again. The antenna feed had been torn out at the mast this time. Torn, not loosened. And his handheld lay on the floor of the cab with the battery run dead and the transmit key jammed down. Jammed down on the secondary channel. Hours. The door of the cab, which Ryan latched from inside every night of his life, was standing open above him, and Boone was gone. An 11-year-old healer who never in his life left that man's radius. Gone. The crew searched. The flight searched. I have searched every season since in ways I'll get to. No dog, no collar, nothing then or ever. They ruled it an accidental fall, and the world accepted that and moved on. And I learned all of it days later. Secondhand standing at my radio while a ranger's voice told me to please keep this off the air until the family was notified. That was the moment this stopped being a story about what was happening to me and Ryan. That was the moment it became a story about what I was going to do. Because here's the thing I knew. Standing there, knew flat. The way you know your own name with no theater to it at all. It had taken the ladder to keep him up there. It had waited out the schedule until the world stopped checking. And a creature that had kept rules for 4 years and then spent one summer breaking them one piece at a time in order was not done. It had solved Tower 9. I was the last lit window on the mountain. And the strike on my own tower back in July had stopped feeling isolated a long, long time ago. I want to tell you why I didn't leave. Because you're asking, and it's a fair question, and the answer isn't bravery. I did ask. The Tuesday after they found Ryan, I called the district and requested an early end to my season, and the answer that came back was reasonable, which is the worst thing an answer can be. The district had just lost one of two lookouts in the driest August in a decade. The camera network covered the north half. My quadrant had two blind drainages the cameras couldn't see into. Red flag weather was stacked up for 2 weeks. And would I please hold on through the fire weather, after which they'd fly me out with their gratitude. The ranger who told me this had just processed the paperwork on a dead friend of mine, and his voice was kind. And I heard myself say, yes, part of it was the leg, if I'm honest. Walking out meant 26 meters alone, and I'd seen what walked that trail. The tower was 60 ft of steel with one ladder. It was, by every measure I'd grown up with, the strongest position in the country. And part of it, I'll just say it, was Ryan. Somebody had turned the last thing that man ever did into a personnel file. Leaving meant signing it. So I stayed. And I kept doing what I'd already been doing because Ryan's protocol had been running at my tower since the first week of August. Since the night of the limb, the private log, quiet after dark, the headlamp taped down to a red pinhole. After they found him, I went further. I moved my weather calls off the top of the hour and varied them daily by as much as 40 minutes, which dispatch found eccentric and I found necessary, because I was finishing the experiment Ryan had died knowing the answer to. And I need you to hear the result plainly from a man who ran it on his own life for 14 nights across that August. It never once came before my last radio call of the evening. Never once, in 14 nights, whatever time I made that call, I moved the call, and its arrival moved with it. The radio was the trigger. Ryan had it exactly right. It had learned that the last transmission meant the man in the box was done for the day. And you can decide for yourself which is worse. A thing that big in the dark, or a thing that big in the dark that has been listening to you all summer long and knows what your voice on the radio means. Those weeks, my log reads, as one plain progression, every entry closer, the cash box first. 40 yards out, padlocked steel, and I came down one morning to find it open. And I want to be exact, because exact is what scared me. The hasp wasn't torn off. The staple had been unscrewed from the wood. 4 screws backed out clean and standing in a little group on the lid. Nothing inside was scattered. The food was gone. So was the satellite messenger I'd carried on the walk toward 9. I'd been keeping it in that box with the trail gear, which was my mistake, and I'll own it here because it mattered later. Everything else was stacked, and the padlock, still locked, sat on top of the stack. I stood looking at that arrangement for a long time. You can teach yourself to live with strength. The screws were not strength. The screws were a message about the quality of the hands. The propane line next. 3 nights on the fitting at the tank backed off a half turn. A leak I caught by smell at dawn. Half a turn. Enough to empty my tank in a night or 2. Enough if I'd been slower to smell it. For other outcomes, I made myself stop calculating. Then the strut strikes began. And this is the part everyone who's heard pieces of this story asks about. So let me lay it out straight. My tower stood on 4 legs, northeast, southeast, southwest, northwest, and the ladder ran up the east side between the 2 eastern legs. The first strike, the one back in July, had been the northeast leg. Now they came every second or third night. Always 1 strike, always past 2 in the morning, always that same full structure ring you feel in your back teeth. Southeast leg, then the southwest, then the northwest, then northeast again and around. And I'd lie in my bunk with my hand flat on the floorboards, feeling the tone die out of the steel. And I finally understood the pattern because there wasn't one, except that the strikes moved through the compass points and skipped none. And every circuit was measured, and none of them ever touched the ladder. It was saving the ladder. Everything else on my mountain got tested, loosened, opened, or struck. The one way down stayed pristine, and the morning I put that together is the morning I stopped thinking of the tower as the strongest position in the country. Strength wasn't the fight it was picking. It had unscrewed my food, bled my heat, and wrung my walls, and it had kept the stairs nice. And any man who's ever pushed a fire in front of a wind knows exactly what that is. I'd done it for 9 years. You don't attack what you're hurting. You make everywhere else worse than the direction you want it to go. It wasn't besieging me. It was ushering me. The night I finally saw it whole was the 19th of August. And I remember the date exactly because that was the night the dry lightning came. A fire lookout works a lightning bust all night at the windows plotting strikes. Ordinarily, it's the best night of the season. I stood at my east glass with the Osborne between me and the dark, and the first cell came through at 11 hig with rain that never reached the ground. And on the 4th or 5th flash, the meadow below my tower printed itself on my eyes, the way flash-lit ground does. Every grass blade, the cash box, the wood pile, all of it stark and still. The meadow was empty. Strike 4 seconds, strike. Empty. Empty. Then it wasn't. It stood in the center of the open ground 40 ft from the base of my tower facing me. The flash gave it to me entire and then took it away, and I stood in the after image with my hand locked on the firefinder, and the next flash moved at 15 ft left. And the one after that put it closer, and no flash ever caught it moving. Stillness in every frame. I'll describe it one time because Ryan described it once, and I'll honor the format. Upright, 9 ft at the least. It stood past the cash box, and I have since measured what it would take to stand past the cash box, and the answer is 9 ft to 4 in. Shoulders wider than my door, massive through the chest, built to carry weight, arms hanging with the hands past its knees, and the whole of it dark except the face, which the lightning kept trying to give me, and I kept refusing to take. I'll tell you the one thing I couldn't refuse. It didn't blink at the flashes. Every strobe of that storm, the eyes were open and they were on my window and they were patient. And between the thunder, I felt more than heard the low sound coming off it. A pulse down at the bottom edge of hearing, steady. And I stood in my glass box 60 ft up and understood with total clarity that the box was the only reason I was being permitted to look back. Somewhere in that hour, I also did my job. A strike put fire into a drainage 8 miles southwest, and I broke my silence and called down a possible start on the rough bearing inside of 10 minutes, with a thing still standing in my meadow between flashes. And at first light, I put the Osborne on the confirmed smoke and refined the location, azimuth and description. My voice level because Ryan's would have been. And here's a thing I owe the record. The response to that fire saved my life for 9 days, and nobody flying it knew. Helicopters worked my quadrant for 2 days. A rappel crew was on the smoke through the week. The sky had machines in it, and the mountain went empty. No strikes, no visits. My cache stayed shut. It knew what aircraft meant. 4 summers of watching this district. Of course, it knew. And it simply subtracted itself. And I slept. And I even let myself half believe the pressure had broken for the season. The crew demobbed on the 28th. The last helicopter went out over the divide at 6 in the evening, and I stood on my catwalk and listened to the rotors fade south, and the quiet that came up out of the drainage behind them went deeper than any quiet all summer. And I went inside and did not make my evening radio call at all. It came back on the night of the 1st of September. And this time, the sound that woke me wasn't a strut. It was the ladder. The sound a tower ladder makes when something takes hold of it is not a strike, and it does not ring. It's a groan. steel stringers flexing against their bolts, a long, low complaint that travels up the east legs and into the frame of the cab. And I came out of sleep with both hands already flat on the floorboards, and felt it as much as heard it. A slow testing pull, then release. Then again, something hit the bottom of my ladder in the dark, gripping and flexing 20 ft of steel, the way you'd test a rope before trusting it with your weight. I did not go out on the catwalk. I lay on the floor of my own tower with my heart slamming and my ear against the boards, and I listened to it test my ladder for 6 or 7 minutes. And then the mountain went quiet, and I lay there till dawn. In the morning, the bottom rungs told the story. 4 of them bowed, not bent in the middle the way a rung bends under a boot, bowed at the sides. Both stringers sprung a half-inch out of parallel from grip. It had wrapped hands around my ladder and pulled, and the steel had given it a half-inch, and it had filed that number away and left. I want to walk you through the 4 days that followed, because they're the last 4 days, and because everything I'd been in my life before that mountain came due in them. Day 1, the antenna went. I woke to a dead radio and found the guy wire that braced my mast snapped clean at the lower anchor and the mast folded over the catwalk rail. The feed line torn out at the connector, not unscrewed this time, torn. The era of subtlety was over, and the message was the same one it had sent Ryan. No more voices. I still had my handheld 5 watts into a compromised repeater path, which bought me broken, half-copied exchanges with dispatch when the atmosphere allowed. I got enough through to report the mast down and request the maintenance flight. Weather was moving in. The flight went on the board for the 6th of September, 4 days out. Day 1 evening, it stood in the meadow before full dark. First time in daylight ever. It didn't test anything and it didn't come closer. It stood where the lightning had shown it to me, facing my window for over an hour. I timed it because measuring things is what I had left. And I stood in the glass and looked back, and the 2 of us conducted whatever that was. And when the light died, it was simply no longer there. I understood the hour perfectly. There was nothing left to dismantle. My food was down to what was in the cab. My heat was rationed. My antenna was folded over the rail and my ladder had been measured. The hour in the meadow was the last item on a list. It was letting me watch it wait. Day 2, I stopped being a lookout. I'll tell you the exact minute it happened. 9 in the morning, kneeling on the catwalk over my dead mast with a multi-tool, trying to save the feed line, and my hands were shaking too badly to hold the connector. And I knelt there 60 ft up over country I'd been sworn to watch. And I heard my own voice say out loud to nobody, "You're not getting off this rock by fixing a radio." And every part of me went quiet. The way it used to go quiet on a fire line when the wind turned and the whole crew understood what the day was actually about. 9 years of my life, I was a man whose job was to stand in front of the worst thing in the forest and take its options away. I'd let 2 years of a bad leg and 1 summer of being hunted talk me into forgetting that kneeling on that catwalk. I remembered down in the cab. I took inventory the way you take inventory for a burnout operation, because that's what it was going to be. I had 5 gallons of drip torch mix, diesel and gas left over from a spring burning project, and stored in my care sitting in a red can at the base of the tower. This whole story. I had a full case of fuzzies, the road flares we carry for lighting backfires, 30 of them, each one 2,000 degree in for 10 minutes. I had a flare pistol and 6 aerial cartridges. I still had the district shotgun in 5 slugs. And I'll be honest about the weight I gave it. I had watched this thing bow structural steel with its bare hands. The shotgun was insurance, not the answer. I had 200 FT of static line and a rack of hardware from the maintenance kit. And I had a rock face below the back of my catwalk, the southwest side, where the granite knob sheared off and dropped another 40 near vertical feet below the tower. Close to 100 FT of air, rail to bottom terrace, the one aspect of my tower where nothing of any size could stand at the bottom and wait. And I had the one asset it had spent all summer teaching me it respected. It had vanished whenever aircraft or suppression crews were working the district. It had watched this district burn for at least 4 summers. And it had never once been in a burn drainage, never crossed one, never lingered when smoke was working. It knew fire the way every wild thing knows fire. It just didn't know fire the way I know fire. Here's what I understood by day 2. And I'm going to lay it out the way I brief a crew. It would not climb while I was awake and transmitting. A whole summer of listening had taught it. The box was occupied and watching, and patience had always been its winning move. It wanted me to come down. 4 days of a scheduled flight stood between it and forever, and I believed. I had staked everything on this by nightfall, that it knew about the flight. It had heard my broken traffic with dispatch. It had 4 days of patience left, and then the sky would fill with rotors, and its summer's work would fly away, and a creature that had waited 4 years does not let the work fly away. Before the 6th of September, it was coming up my ladder. The only question left standing was whether that happened on a night it chose or a night I chose. Day 3, I built the operation, and I built it slow and in the open because it watched the tower all night, and I could take nothing for granted about what it understood. Everything I did had to read as a man doing chores. I carried the red fuel can up in 4 trips with a day pack, a gallon and change at a time, firewood stacked over it. I split wood at the base for an hour, loud and ordinary. And what I was actually doing was placing dry splits against the east legs. I strung my static line off the southwest catwalk in the afternoon and rappelled the rock face once slow. An old man's practice run with my bad leg held out of the work, and it cost me so much that I sat at the bottom for 10 minutes before climbing back around the long way. But the line held, the anchors held, and I now had a way off the back of my tower that did not involve the ladder. That evening, I dressed the ladder. Burlap sacking from the maintenance kit, wrapped and wired along the stringers and around every 3rd rung. Old cotton rope run up the wooden rest landings, dry splits wired against the 2 eastern legs above the wood piles. I hung the fuzzies in a daisy chain off the first landing with their strikers wired to a single pull of parachute cord, and I ran the cord up through my floor hatch. The fuel stayed in its can because fuel misted onto bare steel is gone by morning, and I needed it to wait 1 more day. By dark, the east side of Tower 14 was rigged to burn, and none of it showed. The weather had come in the way the maintenance delay promised. Wind out of the southwest, gusting through the evening, forecast to run all night at 20 and better. Southwest wind meant the fire would push northeast, away from my rock face, away from my rope, into the face of anything on the east side. Day 4, the 5th of September, an hour before sunset. I went down one last time with the garden sprayer and loaded everything: the burlap, the rope, the rungs, the landings, a poured line around the eastern legs, 5 gallons of drip torch mix laid into a wick 60 ft tall. Then I climbed back up, and I'm not going to pretend the last part of the operation was tactics. The last part was the piece I'd been circling for 3 days. I broke the schedule. All summer it had learned me through sound. My radio meant awake. My silence meant done. My light meant the box was watching. So at last light, I made my evening call to dispatch on the handheld. Routine, weather, and status. Off the air, good night. Then I turned off my lamp. Then I sat on the floor of my dark cab below the sight line of my own windows with the parachute cord around my left hand and the flare pistol in my right. And I let Tower 14 say in every language I taught it all summer long, "He's done for the night. The box is asleep. Come and see." Full dark came around 8:30. The wind was doing what the forecast sold. Long southwest pushes. The cab swaying its familiar half-inch. The guy cables singing, Wind is loud in a tower, loud enough that I couldn't trust my ears through the walls. So, I sat with my palm flat on the floorboards because the boards had never once lied to me. And I waited, and time did the thing it does. I checked my watch at what I'd have sworn was midnight, and it was 9:40. At some point, I thought about Ryan. I'd been keeping him out all day because grief slows a man down, and I'd needed every part of me working. But sitting in the dark with the cord around my hand, I let him in. I thought about 31 seasons. I thought about a man lying at the base of his own tower with his door standing open above him, and what the last thing he ever heard on his ladder was. And my hands went perfectly steady. And they stayed that way. I'm not saying that's a healthy mechanism. I'm saying it's the one I had, and it worked. And I think he'd sign off on the use I put it to at 11 minutes 1 in the morning. I know because I wrote all of this down 2 days later in a hospital bed while it was still burned in. The first load came up through the floorboards. Not the ladder, the northeast leg. One long, slow flex, the frame taking load, and my whole body snapped tight because I'd felt the tower carry weight and wind all summer. And this was different. This was point load down low. And then it was gone. Then the southeast leg closer to the ladder, testing, circling the east face one last time, hands on my tower in the dark. And I sat under my windows, not breathing. And I heard, through wind, through 60 ft of structure, felt in the bones of my skull more than heard. The sound of the bottom of my ladder taking full weight. The stringers groaned. The frame of the holy east side shifted a half-inch a settling, and then, in a rhythm I will hear for the rest of my life. The ladder began to carry that weight upward. Not fast, rung by rung, each one a flex and a breath of strained steel, and the pitch of it climbing as the load came up the tower toward my floor. And I want to be honest with you about that minute because I owe you honesty more than I owe you my dignity. I came apart for about 10 seconds sitting in the dark with everything I'd rigged waiting around me. I was nothing but a man in a box listening to the box fail, and my chest wouldn't pull air, and the cord in my left hand did not exist, and the only thought standing was 60 ft. No other way down. It's on the only way down. What put me back together was the smell. It reached me through the floor hatch's seams, through wind 60 ft up. And it was the smell from the clearing by the spring, the one I'd blamed on a bedded elk back in July. Wet hide and crushed green wood, and the older thing underneath. Dense enough now to taste, and my body did the thing 9 seasons had drilled into it. The thing it does when smoke crosses a fire line. It stopped debating. The fear stayed. It just stopped deciding things. I pulled the cord through the floor. I heard the strikers rasp, all of them, one motion, and the fuse took, and 2000° met a fueled ladder in a 20-mile wind, and the east side of Tower 14 went up all at once. The sound hit the whole structure at once. One enormous concussion. Light came up through every seam in my floor, orange and violent, and under my hands. The ladder's rhythm stopped, and then the whole tower moved. Not the wind's half-inch. The frame wrenched. The cab racked hard enough to walk the stove an inch on its feet. And I understood that 60 ft below me, inside the fire, it had not let go. It was still on the ladder. It was gripping 20 ft of burning steel. And the tower was taking everything it had. And the sound that came up through the structure then is the one thing in this story I will not try to put into words for you, because I have tried for years in the dark, and the words all fail the same way. I'll tell you its dimensions and nothing else. It was louder than the fire. It was not an animal sound, and it was not a human sound, and it was aimed 60 ft of burning tower between us, and I have never in my life been addressed so directly. I went out the southwest door onto the catwalk into a wall of heat light, hooked the line, and went over the rail. The descent I mostly can't give you because I mostly wasn't there for it. Firelight strobing on granite, the rope tearing through my gloves faster than any rappel I'd ever run, because slow had stopped being on the menu. My bad leg swinging into the rock face on the second bound and the old hardware in it going. I heard it more than felt it. A dry crack under the fire's roar and the pain arriving a full second later, whiting everything. I remember hitting the bottom terrace on my back. I remember the world above me, my tower. The whole east side of it fully involved now, stair landings dumping fire into the wind. And on the ladder, in the middle of it, the shape burning, still climbing. It had gone up instead of down, through fire gripping fired steel. It had committed everything to the same simple truth I'd bet my life on an hour earlier. The box at the top held the thing it had spent the entire summer working toward, and patience had never once failed it, and it didn't know how to write the summer off. It made the catwalk. I lay on the rocks nearly 100 ft below with my leg in pieces, and watched it stand upright into the wind at the top of my tower, burning 9 ft of it against the sky. And it turned its head and looked down through the fire at me. At me, on the ground, out of the box. I'd like to tell you I looked away. I didn't. I owed it to Ryan to see the end. And the end did not come fast. It stood on my catwalk while the cab and the landings burned. Minutes I lay through without moving. The wind feeding 60 ft of dry-built 1950s structure exactly the way I'd known it would. And the east side went first because the east side had spent a month being struck. Every brace it had dented and worked loose all summer, let go in that heat and steel that hot loses its temper all at once. The east legs buckled. The tower came down out of the sky with the cab folding through its own frame, and it rode all of it down into the collapse, and the collapse landed on the fuel I'd stacked, and the whole top of the knob became one fire. I heard it once more out of the middle of that briefer. Then the fire was the only sound on the mountain. I did not pass out for a while yet, and so I'm the only living witness to the next part, which is that nothing walked out. I watched that burning wreck with the focus of a man who has no other option. Through the ignition of the grass and the run of flame northeast into the timber, exactly northeast, exactly the lane I'd drawn for it with the wind, and nothing came out of the frame of Tower 14. The steel held it. The fire kept it. It was over. I won. Then I spent 2 days finding out what winning costs. But that was the price, not the outcome. And I've never once confused the two. Part 8. The price. Then the fire I started crowned into the timber northeast of the knob inside the first hour. And by dawn it was a real fire with a name and a number. And I was a man with a shattered leg, a smoke column behind me, and 26 meters of trail between me and the trailhead. The first stretch of it owned by my own fire the moment the wind should shift. I made a splint out of the rope hardware and 2 lengths of char-hardened lodgepole. And I'm not going to walk you through those 2 days mile by mile because the honest account is repetitive. Crawl, stand, fall, arrange the leg, apologize to Ryan out loud for reasons that made sense at the time. Continue. I made 6 of the 26 emissaries. That was the whole 2 days. I drank out of the spring below the outcrop where the 4 snap trees had stood since July. The fire had split around the spring's wet granite pocket. The slopes above and below it burned black, but the 4 cross trunks stood scorched and whole. The structure was still there. I looked at it a long time from the ground on my back, filling my water. And I finally understood it wasn't shelter and had never been shelter. It was the first message meant for me, left where the new lookout drew his water nearly 2 months before the end. I am here. I am strong. I can see you. Understood. I told, it received. The helicopter found me on the second afternoon because a 900-acre fire throws a column you can see for 60 miles, and a column that size brings every aircraft in the state. and one of them was tasked with the question of the missing lookout. I woke up in a hospital in Boise with a rebuilt leg, a federal investigator's card on the nightstand, and a decision to make. Here's the decision I made. And 30 seconds of listening to myself rehearse the truth was all it took. Ryan had 31 seasons of standing, 6 plaster casts in a footlocker, and a written log. And the system had turned him into an accidental fall, and a resignation entry he never authorized before his body was even off the mountain. I had a burned tower, a wildfire with my name on it, and a story about a 9FT animal that unscrews padlocks. I knew exactly what the truth would buy me: a psychological evaluation, and the word delusional written beside my arson, so I gave them a story I could carry. A propane flash in the night, and the record already supported it because I'd logged that loosened fitting weeks earlier that damaged the cab, killed the base radio, and put me out on the catwalk. I went off the back on the rope, broke the leg on the rock, and lay there believing the fire above me had starved out against the steel, and then hurt, cut off, and unable to walk out. I intentionally lit the cached fuel at the base of the tower to raise a column somebody would see. Intentional ignition, admitted freely by an injured man signaling for his life. Everything else an accident with a paper trail. They took the deal the story offered. I pleaded to a reduced charge, took probation, and signed a restitution agreement covering the tower and a negotiated slice of the suppression costs. And my attorney called the outcome a miracle, and I paid it. I'm still paying it. I'll be paying it for years, and I sign every check without bitterness. And now you know what almost nobody in my life knows, which is why. Because that invoice is real, and I burned that tower on purpose, and a man pays for his fire. It's the cheapest part of what the mountain cost me. Ryan paid more. Now the accounting you actually stayed for. The morning after the containment lines held, the origin and cause investigators working the burned knob found the collapsed frame of Tower 14. And beneath the folded steel of the cab and stair structure, they found remains. Badly calcined fragments of something large, no intact skull, no complete hands or feet, everything cracked apart and fused into the wreck by the heat. It's in the incident documentation, one line, and the line says, probable black bear. Nobody measured a femur because there was no whole femur left to measure, and the fragments were too far gone for anything useful. A dead bear under a burned structure is a fact nobody questions, in a district that had every reason that season to want its files closed, and the remains were disposed of with the wreck, and that was the entirety of the world's curiosity. I made one phone call from the hospital about it. A fire behavior analyst I'd worked 3 seasons with a friend who'd walked the origin. I asked him casual what the bear had measured. He was quiet a second, and then he said, nobody measured it. It was big. Honestly, everybody kind of stopped standing near it. Then he laughed, and I laughed, and we talked about my leg. Everybody kind of stopped standing near it. That's the closest thing to a witness I get. And I've decided it's enough. Because here's what I have that no report can touch. I watched it climb into that fire. I watched it ride 60 feet of steel into the ground. I lay on that rock through the whole burning night with my eyes on the wreck, and nothing walked out. And the remains went into the record, however wrong the word beside them. Ryan's thing. The shape that stood at his trine for 4 patient summers. The hands that took his ladder, whatever came up his tower on the night the world had marked him already gone, is dead. I killed it with the one thing I had left from the man I used to be, and it is not out there anymore. And I know that the way you know the fire is out when you've cold-trailed it with your own bare hands. I don't wonder. Wondering is for the unresolved. And I resolved it. The district never rebuilt 14. 9 came down 2 seasons later. Hazard structure. And with it went the last man lookout in that entire country. It's all cameras now. detection software, solar panels, a lens on every ridge that matters. And I think about that more than I think about almost anything else because the cameras never key a radio at 9 in the evening. They never sleep, never transmit last calls, never teach the timber their schedule. Whatever else moves through those drainages. And I make no claims tonight beyond the one thing I killed. It had 4 summers of history. And history tends to mean family. Whatever else is out there has nothing left to learn the country from. No, that's not fully honest. And I promised you, honest, one thing left. I go back. Every October after the season ends and the crews are gone, I walk in from the trailhead. The leg allows it slowly, and slow suits the errand. I go to the knob where my tower stood, and then I go down the northeast slope to the spring past the outcrop, and I whistle, and I put a full day into those drainages every year, looking for an old blue healer or what's left of one, because Ryan would have looked for me. I've never found Boone. I've never found anything at all. The elk are back on the north side. A district wildlife biologist I got to know afterward tells me they came through on the old schedule the very next spring, June into August, exactly the way Ryan always said they had for 30 years. And she finds that interesting, and I find it conclusive. The woods are just woods now. I walked them alone in October, unarmed, and I have never once felt watched. That's how I know I won. That's the story. The record says a lookout burned his tower, and the record can keep saying it. You know what burned and why and what it cost and who it was for. His name was Ryan. 31 seasons. He read that country better than any camera ever will, and he was right about all of it. And there is one fewer thing in the Idaho backcountry tonight because of him. Trinity Lake is low again. That's the only reason I'm finally writing this down. I'm not going to name the cove where it happened. I know that cost me something. The second a person telling a story like this refuses to give directions, half the audience decides he's making it up. And I've made my peace with that. The road I'm going to tell you about comes up out of the water whenever the reservoir drops far enough. And people have already started walking the exposed lake bed this summer, taking pictures of the old stumps and the foundations. Handing out exact directions would defeat the entire reason I'm doing this. I've also changed the names of the 3 men who were with me. One of them didn't come home. His family knows what the rest of us say happened out there, and they asked us years ago to keep his name away from anything with the word Bigfoot attached to it. I've honored that for more than 10 years, and I'm going to keep honoring it. So, he's Nate in this story, and the other 2 are Cal and Owen, and I'm just the guy telling it. Now I know what that word does. Bigfoot. The moment it shows up, a certain number of you just stop taking me seriously. And here's the thing. Before this happened, I'd have been standing right there with you. I believed people saw bears standing upright. I believed distance and bad light turned ordinary animals into monsters. I believe some folks flat out lied because they like the attention. I still believe all 3 of those things happen probably every single week somewhere. I also know what came across the bottom of Trinity Lake in September of 2015, in full morning sun over open ground, with nothing between it and the 4 of us but a 4-mile of dried mud. It wasn't a ghost. It didn't vanish into thin air. It didn't imitate anybody's voice. It didn't do one single thing that needed a supernatural explanation. It was an animal, a living animal that ate and left tracks and bled when it got hurt. What made it terrifying was that it was stronger than anything I'd ever shared ground with. It was completely at home in terrain that could kill a grown man in 2 steps. And it understood that terrain better than we ever could. That's the whole story, really. Everything else is just me telling you how we learned it. Point is, 4 of us went into that cove on a Thursday. 3 of us came out Saturday on a utility road, and 2 workers who had never met us in their lives stood next to their truck and watched the reason why walk down a slope on 2 legs. Let me back up and do this properly. In September of 2015, I was 36 years old and living outside Redding, California. I installed flooring for a living, and I want that on the record because it matters for how you weigh everything that follows. I wasn't a survival instructor or a wildlife biologist or one of those guys with a podcast and night vision gear. I'd hunted and fished with my dad since I was old enough to carry my own pack. I camped whenever work allowed, and that was the honest extent of my qualifications. The trip was Nate's idea, and the trip existed because of his grandfather. Nate grew up in Trinity County. His grandfather had worked road crews around the reservoir back when the dam went in. And when the old man passed, Nate ended up with boxes of his papers, survey sheets, project maps, faded typewritten documents that meant nothing to anybody. Nate went through all of it anyway because that's the kind of person he was. And in one of those boxes, he found a map showing an access road running through land that had been underwater for over 50 years. It wasn't a drowned town or anything romantic. During construction, crews had cut roads through the basin to open temporary quarries and move rock and equipment around. And this one followed an old logging route for several miles before climbing to a service road that still existed above the waterline. The map marked a few structures along it. A concrete building labeled as an aggregate transfer site, a short gallery cut through the base of a rock spur, and a maintenance shaft running up toward the modern road. The drought had pulled the lake down far enough to expose a long stretch of it. Nate had actually seen a piece of the road that summer from a ridge through binoculars. He said the exposed section ran through a cove that was nearly impossible to reach from land. His pitch was simple. We take Cal's boat in, camp on the old gravel roaded, poke around the concrete ruins, and this was the real selling point: fish water that nobody else could get to. A cove that hard to access, that far from the ramps in a drought year. We'd have it entirely to ourselves. I remember him saying that we'd have it entirely to ourselves. Cal owned the boat. A 17-FT aluminum fishing rig with a small enclosed bow and an outboard he maintained the way he maintained everything, which is to say, obsessively. Cal was 41, worked on diesel engines, and was the man I trusted most in the world when something mechanical broke. Owen was the fourth. He and I went back to high school. He was younger than the rest of us and in better shape, and he was not careless. I'll say that plainly because it matters. People always assume the group that gets in trouble did something stupid, and the man who died must have wandered off alone or ignored a warning. Nobody on that trip did anything like that. Every choice we made was reasonable with the information we had when we made it. That's what still gets me, honestly. That's the part I chew on at 2 in the morning. We planned to go in Thursday and come out Sunday afternoon. Cal's wife knew the general arm of the lake we were headed for, but not the exact cove. Nate was a little protective of his spot the way fishermen are. No cell service where we were going, and none of us owned a satellite messenger. In 2015, for guys like us, that wasn't strange. It was just camping. We told our families when to expect us. We packed more food than we needed, and we treated it exactly the way we'd treated 20 other trips. The boat ramp told us how strange the year was before we ever left the parking lot. I'd used that ramp plenty of times, and that morning in the dark, the concrete just kept going down. The floating docks had been dragged way down the slope, and when the sun came up, you could see the bare ring running around every hill. This pale, dead band between the trees and the water, marking where the lake was supposed to be. Below it, whole slopes that had spent 50 years underwater sat drying in the open air. Old stumps cut flat by saw crews before the basin flooded stood in rows on ground the color of ash. The lake itself looked narrow and low and somehow unfinished. And Cal kept us in the deep channel the whole way in, because he'd heard the exposed roadids and stump fields were wrecking propellers all summer. The cove was farther in than I expected. A long winding arm between steep hills. The water going shallower the deeper we went until Cal had us at an idle. And then we came around the last bend, and there was the road. I'll be honest with you, it was worth the trip just to see it. It came down out of the living hillside. Real trees, fir and cedar and manzanita, crossed the dead band, curved along the slope on a built-up gravel bed maybe 15 ft wide, and ran straight down into what was left of the water. Below it spread the open lake bed. This huge pale flat of dried mud cracked into plates with driftwood scattered across it, and drowned wood standing up out of it. From the boat, it looked solid enough to drive a truck on. Nate told us right away not to trust it. He'd stepped onto ground that looked exactly that way earlier in the summer from the ridge side and gone in past his knees before he'd taken 3 steps. The crust dries hard on top, he said, and underneath it's 50 years of silt with nowhere to drain. Remember that. Everything that happened over the next 3 days sits on top of that one fact. We landed where the road met the water, tied the bow line to a thick, exposed root at the edge of the gravel, and set a stern anchor to keep the boat from swinging. We carried the tents, sleeping bags, water, and most of the food up to a flat stretch of road at about 50 yards above the water line. The big cooler stayed in the boat. It was heavy. The nights were supposed to be mild, and the whole point of it was to hold fish. And I want to paint the scene fairly because, in the retelling, everything sounds ominous. And the truth is that first afternoon was great. The cove was quiet, but it didn't feel wrong. There were signs people had been through earlier in the season: boot prints in the dust, a couple of old beer cans, a fire ring up near the treen. The road curved away around a rock spur to the north. The hills were green above the dead band, and the fishing, when we got to it, was outstanding. The bottom dropped off hard right where the old road went under, and the trout stacked up along it. By evening, we had 6 good fish iced in the cooler, and had thrown back more than that. We ate well, went over Nate's map by lantern light, planned an easy morning hike to the transfer site ruins. 2 hours out, he figured, back by lunch, fish the rest of the day. I turned in a little after 10, about as content as a man gets. But then, and this is where it starts, so pay attention to how small it is. Before the fishing, on that first walk down the road, Nate had taken us a few hundred yards past camp to find one of the drainage structures marked on his map. It was a square concrete culvert set into the uphill bank, big enough for a man to crawl into with a rusted grate mostly broken away from the opening. We smelled the deer before we saw it. The front half of a young doe had been pushed head first into that culvert. Pushed. Her back legs and hunches stuck out into the daylight, and she wasn't fresh, but she wasn't old either. The flies were still interested, and one side of her had been opened up from hip to ribs. We stood around her the way men do, everybody offering the theory that made the world normal again. Cal said mountain lion. Nate said lions cover their kills. They don't stuff them into concrete. Owen said a bear could have moved her after something else did the killing. And meanwhile, I was looking at the ground next to the culvert, where the drying mud was all torn up. And in the middle of the mess, there were these broad, deep depressions, each one bigger around than a dinner plate, with the edges slumped in, so nothing had a shape you could name. There was hair snagged on the broken grate. Dark brown, coarse, longer than bear hair has any business being. Nate lifted it off with a stick, looked at it, and said, "Bear." We all agreed it was a bear because a bear was available and nothing else was. And we walked back to camp and caught trout all afternoon. That's the rational explanation, doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Hold on to it. It doesn't survive the week. Sometime deep in the first night, the boat scraped. It was a loud grinding aluminum on gravel sound, and it sat all 4 of us up in our tents at the same time. We froze and listened, and there was nothing after it, just wind, which had picked up and was pushing steadily down the cove, ticking grit against the tent flies. Cal got dressed and walked down with a flashlight while the rest of us watched his beam bounce around. He checked the bow line, checked the cooler, came back up, and said everything was fine. Boat must have shifted on the gravel in the wind. The cooler lid was latched. He hadn't walked around the stern side because the ground down there was soft and there was no reason to. Nothing else happened that night. I actually went back to sleep in the morning. We ate early and packed light for the hike. Sandwiches, water, 2 headlamps, a can of bear spray in the group kit, and a second can that lived in Cal's pack. Owen's small hatchet, my folding knife and medical pouch, and Nate's map. While Cal was double wrapping the bowline around the route, I noticed mud on the back corner of the hull, a broad smear of it drying gray about 4 ft off the ground. 4 ft off the ground on the outside of the boat. I looked at it for a second, decided the stern had swung and rubbed the bank in the night when we heard the scrape, and got my pack on. That's what I did with it. A smear of mud 4 feet up on a boat that was tied off an 8 in of water. And my brain filed it under wind and left it there. And we walked up the drowned road into the best morning light you've ever seen. I think about that smear a lot. Everything we needed to know was in it. The scrape in the night, the latched cooler, the height of that mud. Something had already come out of the basin in the dark, put its hands on our boat, and gone away again, quietly, patiently, without taking a single thing. We just weren't ready to know it yet. The first mile of the walk was easy and, honestly, kind of wonderful. The old gravel was packed hard. Hardly any brush had gotten a foothold in it, and the road ran through a drowned world I have nothing to measure against. Rows of flat-cut stumps on both sides, 50 years of lake silt drying on everything, pieces of cable and rusted steel half buried where crews had dropped them before the water came up. Every few hundred yards, mud had washed across the roaded, and we tested each patch before we trusted it, and each patch held. The ground beside the road was a different story, and we got our education cheap, which is the only way you want it. Owen stepped off the gravel to grab an old glass bottle sitting out on the flat. 1 step, maybe 2, and the crust broke under his boot and took him straight down to the knee. It didn't splash. That's the thing that stays with you. It just swallowed his leg and held it, and when he tried to pull out, the suction pulled back. It took 2 of us hauling on him to get him loose, and his boot very nearly stayed down there. After that, nobody so much as leaned off the roaded, and every plan we made for the next 2 days was shaped around one rule: people stay on the road. Remember I told you to hold on to that fact about the mud? Here's the other half of it, and it's the half that matters. The road had to go around the soft ground, around the old creek channels, around the low spots, following the contours in these long, lazy loops because it was built for trucks, which meant that anything that could go straight across the basin could cut every one of those loops. A mile of road could be a few hundred yards of mud if the mud would hold you. The mud would not hold us. Keep that in your pocket. About an hour in, at the start of a long bend around a dead creek channel, we found the track. It was pressed into the wet ground just off the road's edge, 1 clean print and 2 partial ones walking out onto the flat before the crust firmed up and stopped taking impressions. And I want to describe the clean one exactly because I stood over it for a long time. It was longer than any boot in our group by a lot. Owen wears a size 12, and when he set his boot next to it, the print ran at least 5 in past his toe. It was nearly twice as wide at the front as at the back. 5 blunt toe marks along the leading edge. A narrow heel, if you can call anything that size narrow, pressed deeper than the rest. Nobody said the word. I want that on the record, too. 4 grown men stood around that print, and what we did was try to make it into something we already believed in. Cal said 2 overlapping bear prints, front paw and hind paw landing together. That's a real thing. It fools people constantly, and it was a good faith answer. Nate crouched down and pointed out quietly that the heel and the toes sat in one continuous connected shape. 1 pad, no seam. I said mud distorts. Prints collapse. Water runs through them. Edges melt. I'd seen coyote tracks after a thaw that looked nearly human. All true things. All of them said out loud in the tone men use when they need the world to stay normal. And then we kept walking because the map said the ruins were close and the fishing was good. And no one wanted to be the first one to say we should turn a hike around over a hole in the mud. The road bent us around the creek channel in a loop that was most of a mile long, even though the far side of it sat only a few hundred yards away across the open flat. Ahead, across the basin, we could see where we were going. The old road climbing to a low concrete wall, and at the base of a rock spur, a dark square opening. The gallery from Nate's map cut straight through the stone back, when men were moving quarry rock through this valley. There was something standing on the mud between us and it. I noticed it because of the color. The whole basin was pale, gray crust, tan silt, bone-colored driftwood, and this thing was dark, nearly black, standing upright out on the flat, maybe 400 wide off. My first honest thought was burned stump. There were hundreds of stumps out there, and plenty stood taller than a man. This one seemed too tall, but distance does strange things over open ground, and I'd already spent the morning explaining things to myself. I actually looked away from it. Nate had stopped to check the map, and I looked at the map with him. When I looked back, the stump was walking. I want to be very precise about the next 2 minutes because it's the reason I'm writing any of this, and because we had conditions you almost never get in these stories. Full morning sun, open ground, no trees, no fog, no window glass, no campfire light. 4 sober adults standing on a hard road with nothing to do but watch. It was crossing the flat upright, and the proportions were wrong in a way my eyes kept refusing. The torso was too big for the legs, the arms were too long and hung too low, and they swung with real weight. It took maybe a dozen of those long strides. And then, and this is the detail that ended the bear conversation forever, it went down onto all 4s without stopping. Not the way a man drops to hands and knees, all elbows and hesitation. It went down onto its arms in one motion, mid-stride, and kept moving faster now. The arms reaching way out ahead and the back staying almost level. Bears bounce. Anyone who's watched a bear run knows the roll and bounce of it. There was no bounce in this. The hands were placing themselves. Owen saw it next and grabbed my shoulder hard enough to leave a mark I found that night. Then Cal. Then Nate. And the 4 of us stood on that road and watched it cross 300 YD of ground that had taken Owen's leg to the knee, and it barely sank past its ankles. Hands and feet spreading wide on the crust, weight moving smooth and constant, never pausing long enough in one spot to break through. It read that mud the way we read the road. Near the middle of the flat where the ground firmed up, it stood again, and it turned its upper body, and it looked at us. I won't claim I met its eyes at 400 Yunsao. I'll claim what I can defend. The face came around and pointed at us, and it stayed pointed at us, long enough that all 4 of us went completely still, the way you do when attention lands on you, and you feel the weight of it. The head sat low between shoulders, so thick there was no neck to see. The skull rose toward the back instead of rounding into a dome. It stood there being looked at and looking back, and it was not alarmed, and that was somehow the worst available option. Then it turned away, dropped to all 4s at the next soft stretch, crossed the last of the flat, climbed onto the far arm of the road, walked upright to the dark opening at the base of the rock spur. And here's the detail that gave us its size, and it's better evidence than any blurry photo ever taken. The animal had to duck. It dropped its head and rolled its shoulders in to fit through that opening. And months later, Nate went through his grandfather's papers and found the elevation drawing for that gallery portal. 7F'd, it went inside into the dark, and it did not come back out. And the 4 of us stood on the road for I couldn't tell you how long. It was Nate who finally spoke. And Nate, who'd grown up on these hills, who'd laughed at this stuff his whole life, didn't say the word either. He said we had just watched an animal big enough to kill any one of us walk into the place we were hiking to, and he could not think of one single reason to keep going. There wasn't an argument. We turned around. We walked back fast, watching the basin the whole way, and everybody's mouth was running the way mouths run when nerves are up. Cal tried out escaped gorilla and then took it back himself. Owen asked if a bear with mange upright at distance, and Nate just said, "No, bear moves its weight through its arms," and that ended it. Me, I kept replaying the moment it went to all fours without breaking stride. You can dress a man in a suit and he can walk around and fool a camera. But nothing about a man is built to do that, and nothing about a bear is built to do the standing. Whatever we'd watched was built to do both, and did both the way you and I change walking speeds. We came around the last bend above camp, and one of our folding chairs was lying in the road 30 yards below the fire ring with a leg bent flat under the seat. Everything went quiet in me at that point. I remember it very clearly, the talking stopping all at once, the four of us just walking faster. The tents were standing. The packs and bags were where we'd left them. A food sack had been pulled open and gone through, but hardly anything was missing. For about 4 seconds you could tell yourself raccoon, wind, whatever you needed. Then Owen said, "The boat." The boat was gone from the landing, and I had one long, horrible moment of staring at empty water before Owen spotted it across the cove, sitting upright, way out on the mud flat, 150 yards from anything, stern in a few inches of water, bow ridden up onto the silt. The bowline trailed from the cleat. The root we tied to was still there, intact. The rope had parted 2 feet from the knot, and Cal, who had owned and trusted that rope for years, stood holding the broken end and not saying one word. The cooler was up at the landing site. What was left of it? The lid had been torn off, one hinge missing entirely, the plastic cracked and white around the other, and every fish was gone, and the ice was a dark stain in the gravel. And on the gravel where the boat had rested, there were wet marks pressed into the ground. And one of them matched the print from the road, and no part of any of us tried to call it a bear. Here's what I believe happened, and I've had 10 years to think about it, and it matters, because it tells you what we were actually dealing with. I don't believe it stranded our boat on purpose. I believe it smelled 6 trout on ice, came in off the basin in broad daylight while we were gone, and leaned its weight into that boat going after the cooler. And the rope did what ropes do when several hundred lb leans on the other end of them. The wind, which had been pouring down that cove for a day and a half, did the rest. No plan, no trap, just an animal strong enough that its breakfast rearranged our whole situation as a side effect. That's scarier than a trap if you sit with it. Cal wanted his boat back. So Cal did the bravest dumb thing of the trip. He tied a rope around his waist, handed us the other end, and walked out onto the flat toward it. He made 12 fafaro. The crust dropped him to the thigh on one side, then took his other knee when it came down, and the mud closed around both legs and held on. And I watched the calmest man I know come apart a little. Right there, 60 seconds into the ground, we hauled him out flat on our stomachs on the last of the firm crust, and his boot stayed down there until we fished it out with a loop of rope. And when he was back on the gravel, his legs were black to the thigh with silt that smelled 50 years dead, and he sat there shaking in 80 degrees heat. So no boat, no phones. We checked, 0 bars, exactly as expected. Nobody looking for us until we missed Sunday. And even then, our families could point searchers at an arm of a lake with miles of shoreline, not a cove, and an animal that had now been inside our camp twice. Once in the dark while we slept 50 yards away, once in daylight, because it had learned there was food where we were. We could stay 3 nights next to the spot. It had learned that. Or we could use the road. Nate spread the map on the gravel. The drowned road ran on past the transfer site and climbed about 8 miles, all told to a junction with the live maintenance road up top. The one with fresh grading and utility poles. The one that connected to the world. 4 healthy adults could walk 8 mi of roaded before dark. Easy. The problem sat in the middle of the route at the base of a rock spur behind a dark opening 7 ft tall. The road passed close to the gallery. There was no version of the walk that didn't. Nate found a branch route on the map, an old spur that split off before the transfer site and crossed the hillside above the rock spur before rejoining up top. No way to know its condition after 50 years, but it existed on paper and it kept us away from that opening, and that was enough to vote on. People have questioned this decision for 10 years. Every version of this story I've ever told, somebody says you should have stayed at camp, built a fire, waited for Sunday, and look, maybe. All I can tell you is what the choice looked like from inside it. 3 nights in nylon tents beside the place, a very large animal had twice come looking for food. With no working way to leave, against an afternoon's walk to a graded road. We were not fleeing in a panic. We packed carefully. We split the food across 4 packs, filled every water container, took the tarpon bags and both cans of bear spray, and the hatchet and the first aid kit. Cal wrote out a note. Our names, the date, the time, the route we intended, sealed it in a plastic bag and weighted it under a cooking pot in the middle of camp where no searcher could miss it. Then we started up the drowned road a little before noon, into the heat standing up off that basin. I said I'd tell you everything straight. So here's one more thing about that departure. As choices go, it was reasonable. And it was also the last moment this story could have ended with everybody alive. And there is no day I don't know both of those things at the same time. The first hour of the walkout was quiet and hot and almost hopeful. The road climbed and dropped along the contours. We tested the washed-over sections and they held. We found a live stream coming off the hillside and topped off every bottle through Nate's filter. Nobody sat down to eat. We ate walking and we watched the basin, all 4 of us, all the time. When we came back around the Long Creek Channel loop, we passed the track from the morning, except now it had company. A whole line of prints crossed the road there, coming up out of the basin onto the gravel, headed uphill in the direction of our camp, and a second line coming back down, stride noticeably longer, angling off the inside of the curve and straight out across the flat. It had cut the loop. While we'd been standing at our wrecked camp, working up the nerve to leave, the thing that wrecked it had walked this road, gone through our gear, torn our cooler apart, and then crossed a few hundred yards of mud that would have buried any of us, instead of walking the mile of road around. The prints on the gravel had pressed clear through the loose dust into the hard pan underneath. Nobody said anything useful about that. There wasn't anything useful to say. We walked faster. The branch road Nate wanted was marked by a low concrete post, and the post was right where the map put it. And I felt about 10 lb come off my back when I saw it. Then we followed the branch around one shoulder of hillside, and it just wasn't there anymore. A slide had come down across it years ago by the look of the brush and taken the whole outer half of the roaded with it. What was left was a strip of crumbling edge 2 ft wide in places with soft lake bed waiting below it. Even that we might have tried one man at a time, except there was no way to know if the road even existed past the slide. And being strung out along a 2-foot ledge above that mud single file was the exact opposite of everything we'd learned in 2 days. So it was the main road or nothing. Past the transfer site, past the gallery. We came back to the junction, and that's when Owen stopped walking and said without any volume at all that it was out there. It stood on the flat way off, having come around a low ridge of exposed earth. And even at that distance I knew it the way you know a person by their walk, and by the pale patch riding high on its left shoulder. A spot where the dark hair broke and something lighter showed through. It was moving at an angle, not at us. That's important. and it took us a minute of standing there with our chest pounding to work it out. Its line didn't point at us. Its line pointed at the road up ahead of us where the big curve swung in near the rock spur. Cal took the bear spray off his pack and carried it in his hand from then on. And we walked, and I got to spend the next half hour learning what it feels like to lose a race you're not officially running. We were bound to the road, and the road bowed way out around the creek channel. It went straight. Every single time the ground softened, it dropped onto all fours, spread those hands, and crossed. And every time I looked over, the angle between us had closed a little more. And here's the detail from that stretch that has never once left me worse than any charge would have been. Partway across, it stopped, bent down and pulled something out of the mud, held it up, turned it over, looked at it, dropped it, and kept coming. It was making our pace with room to spare, and it had attention left over for curiosity. Whatever effort we were costing it, it wasn't much. It reached the road ahead of us, 200 maybe less. It stood up next to a row of old concrete barriers, and it turned around, and for the length of a held breath, the road belonged to it. And we stood at the far end of the same stretch of gravel with nothing at all on our side. That was my best look at the face, and I'll give it to you plainly, and then leave it alone. A heavy shelf of brow, a nose wide and flat, the mouth pushed forward some, but nothing you'd call a muzzle. The lower face grayish-brown and mostly bare, and the whole expression, and I know I shouldn't call it an expression, unhurried. It looked back down the road at 4 men, the way you'd glance at something you'd already made your decisions about, and then it stepped off the gravel, crossed into the ruins of a collapsed building on the downhill side, and was gone behind the standing walls. We stood there. On our left, mud that would take a man to the waist. On our right, a slope too steep to climb, loaded. Behind us, 8 miles back, the wrong way to a camp with no boat. And ahead, the only road running directly past the place it had just chosen to wait. I've heard people say, fear is loud. Real fear, the kind that comes with time to think, goes quiet, and you go quiet with it, and you weigh things. We talked for under a minute. The road didn't enter the ruins. Wide berth, steady pace, spray up, no running. Running invites things. Every one of us had been taught that since childhood, and through. The smell hit us 30 yards out. Dense animal musk over something gone rotten, worse in the heat, worse than any bear I've walked up on. Cal kept the can pointed at the broken walls the whole way past. Nothing moved in there. Nothing came out. We passed the foundation, and then the road carried us up toward the rock spur, and the gallery opening stood there ahead of us, bigger than it had looked from across the basin. A black doorway framed in old concrete with a rusted gate lying flat in the dirt outside it. The road bent around the outside of the spur. It didn't go in. I could have wept about that, honestly, but we had to pass within 50 ft of the opening, and as we did, Owen pointed once at the ground in front of it and kept walking. The dried mud at the threshold was covered in tracks, going in, coming out. Old ones with rounded edges and ones so fresh the walls of them still stood sharp. Years of them layered, not one boot print among them. That opening had been underwater or under silt for 50 years, and the water had pulled back, and something had found the way back into its old den, standing open. We didn't stop. We didn't speak. We put the rock spur between us and that doorway and climbed, and for 2 hours, the road did exactly what we needed it to do. Up through a narrower stretch of the drowned valley, the flats falling away below. The live green hillside coming down closer on our right. We refilled at a seep. We ate standing up by the map by Nate's reckoning. We were 3 miles from the maintenance road. The sun went behind the western ridge and the temperature started falling off fast, the way it does in that country. and I let myself think about the truck and hot food and telling this story in a bar. Then we came around a bend and the road wasn't there. A slide had come down the hillside recent this one, the dirt still raw and buried 60 ft of roaded. The upper edge of it against the slope looked halfway solid. The lower edge slumped straight down into the dark mud of the basin. Nate went out onto it first with a long branch, tapping, easing his weight on, and he got almost halfway before the crust dropped his right leg to the knee with no warning sound at all. He threw himself flat and spread his weight, and Owen crawled out on the firm line and reached him the branch and hauled him back, and the two of them lay on the gravel, breathing hard while the light died around us with boards, with rope anchors, with daylight, probably crossable, with none of those things. Half loaded in the dark. No. And here's where our options ran all the way out because Nate's map had one more mark on it. Close behind us and above the road. A small concrete building, part of the old transfer system set high on the slope. Solid walls above the mud, a door. We talked it through fast. In that gray last light, and every road out of the conversation was worse than the building ahead. The slide behind miles of dark road past the gallery back to a camp with no boat. Around mud below cliffs above. The animal had been ahead of us and hadn't shown itself in hours. One night, we said, 4 walls, watches, and pairs crossed the slide at first light. The access spur to the building was half buried, but easy enough to follow. Climbing through live brush to a squat concrete box built straight into the hillside about the size of a 2-car garage with a dirt-covered roof and one steel door hanging crooked in its frame. No windows. High on one side wall, a rectangular vent opening with 3 rusted bars still across it. The inside was dry, and the moment my headlamp swung across it, I understood we had made a mistake, and that it was too dark outside to unmake it. The smell was in there, fainter than at the ruins, but in there. A big steel cabinet lay on its back by the entrance, and when Owen ran his light up the doorframe, there was hair snagged on the steel edge, long dark brown strands, some of them 6 in, and mud smeared low along the back wall and one smear higher than my head. Behind the cabinet, in a recessed bay in the floor, there were bones, deer, mostly, some gone white and clean, some not. And we were not the first thing to shelter in that building. We were standing in one of its rooms and it was full dark outside and the slide was behind us and the road below ran past its front door. So, we did the only thing left on the list. We dragged that steel cabinet against the crooked door. It didn't latch, but the cabinet held it shut. We checked that the vent was too high and too barred for anything the size of what we'd seen. We spread the sleeping bags on bare concrete and we split into watches. Nate and I took the first one. He sat by the door with the hatchet across his knees. I sat with the bear spray against my leg. Cal and Owen lay down and pretended, and the building cooled around us and the walls started to sweat, and somewhere out in all that dark, the wind moved down the basin the same as it had every night. A little before 10 hours, gravel shifted on the access road outside. Then it stopped right in front of the door. Nate reached over and shook the other 2 awake without a sound. And the 4 of us sat in that concrete room in the dark and listened. And the quality of the listening is something I can't fully hand over to you. You listen with your whole body. Time goes strange. Minutes stop meaning anything. The door moved. Not a bang, a press. The steel eased inward until it met the cabinet, and the cabinet slid. I felt the scrape of it in the floor under me, maybe an inch. Then the pressure came off, and the door settled back, and something dragged slowly across the outside of the steel end to end, and the metal hummed in its frame under my hand. A smell came in under the door. The ruin smell, the gallery smell in the room with us now. For most of a minute, nothing, and I had just started to let my lungs work again when the vent bars moved. The opening was high on the wall behind us, up near the ceiling, and one of the 3 bars bent inward with a dry metal groan and a fall of concrete dust. And Owen put his flashlight on it. And I will never forget what the light found. A hand covering most of that opening from the outside. 4 long fingers curled in around the middle bar. A thumb braced flat on the wall beside it. Dark gray skin under dark hair. Nails thick and black and blunt. The hand pulled and the bar bent further, and the concrete around its mounting cracked and shed grit, and the bar held visibly barely. Cal came off the floor yelling and hammered the wall under the vent with the flat of the hatchet, and the rest of us joined him, and the noise in that concrete box was enormous. The fingers opened. The hand withdrew, and then the weight went onto our roof. You could follow it. That's the part I'd pay money to forget. A slow grinding shift of mass across the dirt over our heads, dust sifting down from a crack in the ceiling. Each footfall its own event, while the 4 of us tracked it with our faces tipped up corner to corner until it reached the front edge above the door and stopped. And through the bent vent bars, we could hear it breathing deep, even, not winded in the least. It dropped off the roof and the impact came up through the floor, and before anyone could reset the door, pressed in again hard this time. No testing in it, and the cabinet ground back several inches, and a strip of night opened along the door's edge, and in that strip, low down fingers. All 4 of us hit the cabinet at once. Cal brought the hatchet down on the steel of the door beside the gap, a full arm blow ringing. He didn't hit the hand, and I don't think he meant to, and the noise alone did the work. The fingers vanished. The door came shut. We rammed the cabinet back and wedged broken conduit under its base, and then we stood in the dark, holding a piece of furniture against a door, listening to its circle. That's what it did for the next stretch of the night. Circled gravel on the south side, brush cracking up slope, the vent frame ticking as it tested the bars again with something less than full strength. And I have to stop the story here and tell you what was actually the most frightening thing in all of it. Because it wasn't the strength. It never charged the walls. It never screamed. It went from opening to opening, applied pressure, read the result, and moved on to the next one. Never rushed, never frustrated. Whatever was on the other side of that concrete was not confused and was not in a frenzy. It was working a problem, and the problem was us. The second try at the vent was the strong one. A bar tore halfway out of its mounting with a crack of failing concrete. A chunk of rust hit the floor and the hand came through. Through past the wrist. This time, the forearm filling the opening, dark hair flat against it. The bare palm opening and closing on the air of the room, reaching, feeling for what it couldn't see. Owen and I were under it with the hatchet up. Nate had his back jammed against the cabinet, and Cal raised the bear spray and gave the opening one short burst. Most of it hit the wall. Enough didn't. The arm snapped back out of the hole, and something huge moved violently across the roof, one edge to the other. Dirt and stones raining off the eave. And then a sound came down the slope from beyond the building. Brush breaking, gravel pouring, weight moving away downhill fast. And then nothing. Genuinely nothing. For the first time in hours, the spray hung in the room and punished us for our win. Eyes streaming, throat seizing, the 4 of us flat on the floor with our faces in our shirts. And not one of us suggested cracking the door for air. We lay in that burning concrete box the rest of the night, awake in pairs and then in nobody's pairs because nobody slept, and the animal did not come back. And that is the whole of the good news from that building. At first light, we moved the cabinet and opened the door onto an empty slope, and the ground told us the night in full. Tracks everywhere. Below the vent, the clearest prints of the whole trip, where it had stood upright with one foot braced against the base of the wall to work on those bars. Mud and long hair along the roof edge where it had climbed up from the rear slope. The torn bar hanging by a thumb's width of rusted steel, and the bar itself thicker than my thumb. And down the access road, a dark patch in the dirt where the spray had caught it, with long sweeping marks pushed away on either side, where it had knelt and rubbed its face with both hands. I stood looking at those marks in the gray morning light, and of everything on that slope, they came closest to breaking my nerve. Not the strength. The marks of it kneeling there in the dark, wiping its eyes, hurting. Because a thing that can hurt can hold a grudge. That thought is not science, and I don't defend it. I just had it, and I couldn't put it down. Daylight gave us back the slide, and daylight made it worse, wider than it had looked at dusk. The upper line ended at a raw rock face, and Owen climbed partway up it without his pack and came down shaking his head. Rotten stone over a straight drop. Cal walked the lower edge and put a branch into the mud down there, and it went 3 UFT without touching anything solid. Going back down the road meant the ruins, the gallery, the camp, and no boat at the end of it. And there was one more line on the map. Nate had found it while the rest of us were failing at the slide. The building we sheltered in had been a power and monitoring station for the old aggregate system, and a thin, drawn line ran from behind it through the hillside to the far side, coming out near the upper works, near the maintenance shaft that climbed to the live road. An enclosed service gallery cut for the workers who'd run this system passing under the slide that was stopping us. He couldn't tell its length from the drawing. Short, he thought. A few 100 yards of straight line through the rock against miles of exposed road the long way around. We found the entrance 20 yards behind the building, half buried in dirt and brush, a rusted steel door lying open against the stone, and a concrete passage running down into the hill at a shallow angle. The air coming up out of it was cool, and it carried the smell. I want to be fair to us telling this part because this is the decision that costs the most, and it's the one I've defended the longest. We stood at that opening for a long time. Nobody pretended the smell wasn't there. Cal said out loud that the thing had found us outdoors twice, and found us indoors once, and daylight plainly wasn't protection, and distance plainly wasn't protection. And the only thing that had actually worked in 3 days was concrete, and a bottleneck, and the spray. The passage was short. It came out at the shaft. The shaft came out at the road. Every other road was mud, rockfall, or a miss of open ground, shared with something that could cut every loop we had to walk around. So, we organized it the way you'd organize any job. We lightened the packs and left the spare gear in the building. Cal, whose spray had proven the one thing it needed to prove, carried 1 can on his belt with the second con clipped to his pack. Owen kept the hatchet. Nate folded the map into his jacket since he was the only one who could read his grandfather's drawings anyway. I carried the medical kit and both flashlights along with my headlamp. And a little after 8 o'clock in the morning, we walked into the hill. The passage was concrete floor and concrete walls, wide enough for 2 men with dead cable brackets running overhead and a shallow drainage channel along one side. The daylight behind us lasted to the first bend, and then it was headlamps and our boots on grit and the cool mineral dark of a place that had been sealed under a lake for 50 years. It had been used. There's no soft way to put what our lights kept finding. Mud tracks by the entrance, smears along the walls at shoulder height. Its shoulder height, hair on the low brackets, and in one snagged clump, strands of the lighter hair from that left shoulder patch. And we all saw it, and nobody said it. Farther in the drainage channel, bones, deer again, the skull of what I'm fairly sure was a young black bear. Pieces of hide gone flat and hard in the dried mud. Some of it decades old, some of it not. The low water hadn't shown this thing a new shelter. It had reopened its den and we were walking straight through the middle of it. A few 100 yards in, the passage opened into a genuinely big chamber. Rusted equipment frames bolted to the floor, the bones of an old conveyor system, our lights losing the ceiling. 2 ways on a sloped tunnel climbing to the right, which the map called a quarry portal, collapsed at the far end, and the straight passage ahead toward the maintenance shaft. We went straight and past the chamber. The passage tightened, part of the ceiling down in a spill of broken concrete, and there was a place where we had to step over rubble and squeeze one at a time between a support pillar and the wall. Cal went through first, I went second, and on my left, low in the wall, there was a drainage recess, a black opening maybe 3 ft high, running off under the collapsed section. And as I came past it, I turned my headlamp into it out of pure animal caution. And the light fell on packed dirt and old bone and nothing else, and I stepped through and turned to give Cal light for the others. The arm came out of the recess behind me and took Cal's pack, and Cal left the ground. I've gone over the mechanics of that half-second 10,000 times, and the honest version is that there were no mechanics. He was standing. Then he was gone sideways into the dark of that opening to the shoulders, boots off the floor, and the sound he made had no words in it. I got a fistful of his jacket. Owen came over the rubble and got his belt. Nate wedged himself against the pillar and hauled on Owen, and the three of us leaned everything we had against a pole coming out of a hole in the wall, and we lost ground. Hear that plainly? 3 grown men braced against one arm in the dark, and we lost ground. The straps saved him, and the straps nearly killed him. The pack was pinned in the recess with the animal's grip on it, and Cal was pinned to the pack. The shoulder straps sawed across his chest and throat, his face going dark, his free hand clawing for the buckle and not finding it. He got one word out and the word was cut. And I had the knife open and was cutting before he finished it. Webbing is slow. That's another thing I know now that I didn't need to know. The blade walked through that strap a thread at a time with the whole load bucking under it, and partway through the arm heaved again, and Cal's right shoulder came against the concrete edge with a sound I felt in my own arm. A deep, wet pop, and his yelling went up into a register I had never heard from a grown man and have never heard since. The strap parted. Owen got the hatchet under the lower buckle and broke it. Cal came free all at once, and the 4 of us went down in a pile on the rubble, and the pack was simply gone into the hole. And from inside the wall came the sound of tearing fabric and cracking plastic. We dragged Cal back into the big chamber and put light on him. His right shoulder sat wrong, visibly wrong, the joint out of its socket, the arm already curling itself against his body, and blood ran from a gash above his ear where he'd hit the pillar. None of us knew how to put a shoulder back safely, and nobody was fool enough to try it off a video half-remembered. His fingers had feeling. He could walk. We strapped the arm to his chest with a shirt and a salvage strap, and we listened to the wall where the sounds of our food being gone through were slowing down, and we did the inventory nobody wanted to do out loud. The second can of bear spray had been clipped to Cal's pack. 1 can left on Cal's belt part used from the vent, 1 hatchet, 1 knife, 3 flashlights, 4 exhausted men, 1 of them broken, and a map that told us the way out was forward past whatever network of crawl spaces ran parallel to this passage, connected to it, and currently occupied. Nate put his finger on the drawing, on a thin line running alongside the main gallery, joining it again, somewhere ahead. "It has another way around us," he said. Flat, no alarm in it at all, which was its own kind of alarming. We went forward because forward was shorter. And I'll tell you now that of the 4 of us, the man who checked on Cal the most in the next half hour, who carried his pack weight, who talked him up the grade, that was Nate. I want that in the story. Whatever else that place took, it doesn't get to take that. The gallery climbed. We passed side openings, narrow black gaps in the concrete, and at every one of them, we ran the same drill. Owen's light and the spray covering it while the rest of us moved past. Nate reading the floor for fresh mud, and the floor was no help at all because the prints were everywhere and ran every direction, and there was no sorting yesterday from an hour ago. Then the passage ran through a standing steel door, propped open for 50 years. A warning sign still bolted to it with the paint gone. And on the far side, our lights opened up into the second big chamber. A raised steel walkway crossed it, grating underfoot. A waist-high rail down both sides, running above a wide channel cut into the floor, 8 ft deep, 15 wide, floored with dried sediment. On the far end a doorway, and past that doorway by the map, the equipment rooms in the bottom of the shaft. The way out was across that walkway. There wasn't another one. We stood in the doorway a long time and swept every corner of that chamber. The walkway, the channel below it, the dead equipment along the walls. Nothing moved. Nothing our lights could find. Owen went first with the spray. I came second with Cal on my arm. Nate came last, watching behind us, and the grating flexed and rang softly under our boots. And we got to the middle of the chamber, directly over the channel, the farthest point from either door. The hand came up through the grating and took Nate by the left ankle. It had been under the walkway, under us, flat against the ceiling of that channel in the dark, and it had let two of us walk over it, and it took the last man in line. And people can decide for themselves what that selection means, but I was there, and I'll tell you what I think, with my whole chest. Nothing about it was luck. Nate went down face first onto the steel. Owen spun and put the spray straight down through the grate, a full sustained burst into the dark below our feet, and it caught the thing across the shoulder and the side of the face. I saw the hair go wet with it, and the grip on Nate's ankle did not open. I had Nate under the arms. Cal was down on his knees with his one working hand knotted into Nate's jacket. Owen dropped the can and took Nate's belt, and the animal below us pulled down and the three of us pulled up, and for one moment I'd swear on anything you put in front of me. We were winning. We had him rising. I was looking at the back of Nate's head coming up toward me and below us. Through the grate I saw its face come around upward into our lights. The brow, the wide flat nose. One eye pressed shut and streaming from the spray. The lips pulled back off big flat teeth, and it was hurting badly, and it did not let go. It reset its feet against the channel floor. It pulled, and Nate's lower leg went between the grating and the rail bar, and broke. I felt it break. It came up through his body and into my hands, and his scream in that concrete room is the sound I have instead of silence some nights 10 years later. And then the railing mount, 50 years old, holding all of that load, tore out of the concrete, and the top rail swung away into open air, and Nate went through the gap. I held his jacket to the very end of my reach. The fabric tore through my fingers. I want that sentence in the record exactly that way, because for a long time I told it to myself differently, with words that put the letting go on me, and Owen finally sat me down one night and made me say it right. The fabric tore 8 ft is not a killing fall, and Nate landed on his side in the sediment and got his good arm under himself, and he was trying to rise when it reached him. I'm not going to give you the next 5 seconds in detail. His family reads things. What I'll say is that it was fast and that it was the only moment in 3 days the animal ever spent its full strength on a living thing, and that the medical people told us afterward gently and repeatedly that the first instant of it was the whole of it. He wasn't there for what came after. I believe them. I have to. Owen stood at the broken rail and emptied the rest of the can down into the channel, screaming, and the cloud of it came boiling back up through the grating into all of our faces, and the animal took Nate by the leg and drew him underneath the walkway out of our lights into a black side opening in the channel wall. And I went for the gap in the rail. I had one leg through it. Owen hauled me back by the collar and the pack and did not let go of me. And he was right. And part of me has never fully come back from being stopped. And both of those things live in me side by side and always will. We crossed the rest of that walkway blind, coughing, the spray burning our eyes raw, Cal saying, "Move, move, move," in a voice with nothing behind it. Part of Nate's jacket stayed on the rail. Then the far doorway and a climbing passage, and we went up it and did not stop until the burn faded. And there, in a dead equipment room, lit by 3 headlamps, the 3 of us stood and understood our new situation in full. The map was in Nate's jacket. The spray was gone. The hatchet was all we had. And the only mind that could read his grandfather's drawings had carried them down into the channel with him. What I had left was memory. The shaft stood past the equipment rooms close to the live road. That was the whole of what I knew. 2 roots ran out of that room and one died in a collapse, and the other rose as a narrow inclined corridor with rusted pipe and an old ladder track. So, it wasn't navigation anymore, it was the only open door and we took it, and it climbed for several hundred feet and ended at the bottom of a vertical shaft. I put my light up it and the beam found a steel ladder and a platform and another ladder above that, and another, and no top. At the base, an old sliding barrier hung on corroded rollers. A steel panel that could be dragged across the corridor mouth. No lock left on it. Owen and I hauled it shut behind us, jammed the hatchet through the frame and wedged a length of pipe into the roller track. And none of us pretended it was a wall. It was a delay. We were buying seconds and we knew the price of them. Cal looked up the first ladder and said flatly that he couldn't climb with one arm, so we made it a job. We lashed the bad arm tight. Owen went first to pull. I came under him to guide his boots, and Cal climbed 30 ft of steel on his legs and his left hand, with his shoulder out of its socket. And he made noise doing it, and he never once stopped moving. People throw the word tough around. I've seen it. It was on a ladder in the dark in September of 2015. We were nearly at the first platform when the barrier below took a blow that jumped the pipe in its track. The second blow bent the bottom edge inward. Light or dropped angle of it caught a hand coming under the gap, feeling along the floor, and the fingers found the hatchet handle where it ran through the frame and closed on it and snapped it off at the head in one short motion. Not levered it, snapped it. Cal froze on the rungs, and I put my palm on his boot and told him, "Climb." And the whole rest of that shaft comes back to me in pieces, and I've never once managed to run it start to finish. Even now. The barrier tearing halfway off the wall, the animal coming through low, folding itself under the bent steel. It's standing at the bottom of the shaft, head back, looking up at us. The sprayed side of its face dark and swollen, one eye shut. The bare patch on its shoulder, plain in our lights. And I could finally see that patch for what it was. Not different colored hair, but old scarring, a wide healed wound where no hair grew at all. It had been in fights before. Things had hurt it before, and it was here anyway, and it did not use the ladder. It climbed the wall, fingers hooking pipe brackets, cracks, conduit, feet pressing off opposite surfaces, 600 lb of it minimum, going up bare concrete faster than we were going up steel. It made the first platform while we were still short of the second. And then it did the thing that told us more about it than everything else in 3 days put together. It didn't follow us onto our ladder where it would have had to come at us from directly below in a narrow line. It went sideways into a dark side opening off the first platform and vanished. It knew another way up. It had run these passages long enough to hold the whole map of them in its head. The map we just lost, and it was taking a route that would put it ahead of us, or beside us instead of beneath us. We climbed. There's no craft in this part of the story. No thinking, just 3 men going up ladders as fast as a ruined shoulder allowed, while something moved through the rock next to us. At the second landing, a horizontal gallery crossed the shaft, and our lights caught it in there, passing down on all fours in the tight space, one shoulder dragging the wall, its head turning to keep us in its good eye as it went by, close enough that I could hear its hands hitting the concrete. At the third landing there was a smaller steel gate across the side opening, better metal, and Owen got it shut and pinned with a rusted bolt lying in the track. Seconds. seconds before the weight arrived against the far side of it. The frame held the first hit, held the second. On the third, concrete cracked around the lower hinge, and we were already gone. Up the last ladder to the top of the shaft where there was a hatch, and the hatch didn't open. A steel grate overhead, daylight showing in threads around its rim, and on top of it, 50 years. Dirt, rock, roots, grown through two corners. The old lock mechanism rusted into one solid piece. Owen got under it and pushed, and it gave an inch, and sat back down below us. The gate on the third landing came off its lower hinge with the sound of stone letting go, and steel dragged across concrete, and the ladder under our feet began very faintly to hum. I want you to have this picture because I'll carry it regardless. Cal gray-faced one-armed wedging his good shoulder up into a steel grate. Owen with both hands over his head boots on the top rung driving upward. Me prying with a foot-long bar I'd torn off the deadlock mount, dirt raining down into all our faces and below us, coming up the last ladder in the dark. Patient hurt and utterly unhurried. The reason I looked down exactly once its face was turned up. Its good eye was on me. One hand closed over a rung, and the ladder's hum became a shudder. A root tore, the grate lifted. Owen went through the gap with dirt pouring in around him, got his knees on the surface and pulled while we pushed. And Cal went through screaming when the bad shoulder caught the rim. And then, hands had my jacket and my pack, and the sky, the actual sky, swung into view, and I came out onto hot dirt and rolled. And Owen dropped the grate. It came down crooked on the spoiled dirt, one corner riding open a hand's width. We threw rocks on it. I jammed the pry bar through the frame and the grate rose anyway. All of it. Rocks sliding off. The bar bending. A hand out of the gap closing on the bar. Owen's boot coming down on the fingers once hard and the hand withdrawing and the grate dropping. And the three of us doing the only strategy left in the pack. We ran uphill over rock and dry brush because uphill was where the utility poles were. A line of them crossing the ridge with a pale scrape of graded road beneath. And behind us, muffled steel and stone taking punishment. I looked back once from the slope and saw the grate go, flipped clean off, skidding away downhill. And it came out of the ground on all fours into the daylight and stood. And even then, even running for my life, some part of me went quiet at the size of it out in the open. It rubbed its bad eye with the back of its wrist. It breathed. Then it looked up the slope at us and started climbing. What saved us on that slope, I've come to believe, was three things. And I'm going to list them because I owe the truth a complete accounting. The first was a band of broken rock that Owen steered us into. Big fractured slabs with man-width gaps where our size finally worked for us, and its size finally worked against it. It had to turn sideways and stone shifted under its weight, and we bought back the ground we'd lost. The second was my pack near the top with it closing again and cow failing. I pulled my pack off and threw it downhill, and the animal stopped at it, pinned it with one hand, tore it open and stood over the spilled food. The same thing it had done with Cal's pack in the wall, and I will not dress that up as clever. I'd watched it get distracted by food once. It was the only move I had left, and I made it, and it bought us the last 100 yards. The third thing was the road itself. We came up over the lip onto graded gravel, live gravel, with fresh tire prints in it, and utility poles strung along it. And when the animal crested behind us, it stopped dead at the edge of it. It stood there at its full height and looked both directions along that cut, at the poles, at the wire, at the pale, open scrape of it, and whatever 50 years in that basin had taught it about the works of men. The lesson held it there for 3 full seconds. Then it started after us anyway at a walk. And that walk was closing the distance because Cal was done hanging off both of us, and I was doing the honest math on how many yards were left in him. The truck came around the lower bend. A white utility truck. 2 workers in it. and I will love the sound of that engine until the day I die. The driver stood on his brakes at the sight of us. 3 men covered in mud and blood, one of them wrecked, all of us waving. And the passenger was out the door before the truck fully stopped coming toward Cal, and Owen just yelled it, pointing back up the road. Look, look. They looked, both of them. It stood in the middle of the road at the bend, 60 yards up, fully upright in afternoon light, with nothing around it to be confused with. It looked at the truck. The workers did not move and did not speak, and the animal held there for a slow 10 count. I know because some detached piece of me counted, and then it stepped off the road and went down the slope on 2 legs, unhurried, and the brush closed over its shoulders, and it was gone. The workers got Cal into the back seat, and everybody talked over everybody, and the driver got dispatch on his radio and called for medical, and we started downhill. And at one bend the trees opened and gave us the whole basin, the flats, the drowned road, the rock spur, small and gray and far below. And it was already down there already. It had dropped hundreds of feet of slope in the time we'd driven 2 bends. And it was crossing the open mud on all 4s. A dark speck moving smooth and certain over ground that would swallow any man ever born. Headed home to the gallery where we'd first watched it duck through a 7F'd doorway. That was the last time I saw it. A speck on the mud. Going home. Cal went into surgery and reading that night. Dislocated shoulder with tearing, a concussion, a scalp laceration, and nerve trouble in the right hand that took most of a year to fade and never fully left 2 of his fingers. He went back to diesel engines anyway. He'd want me to say that. Owen and I spent that first night with sheriff's deputies, telling it straight. Both of us, separately. And here's the thing that surprises people. Nobody laughed at us. Not that night. We told them our friend was dead in an abandoned work structure under the ridge, killed by a large animal we could not identify. And the 2 utility workers gave their own statements separately, and both of them said they'd seen a large dark animal standing upright on the road. One allowed it might have been a bear. The other, an older guy, 30 years on those roads, refused to call it anything at all. He just said it was taller than any man he'd ever stood near. And it went down the slope on 2 legs, and he'd never seen a bear do that, and didn't expect to. The recovery team went in the next morning through the shaft after securing what was left of the grate. They found Nate where the animal had left him, 40 ft from the walkway in a side passage off the channel. His pack was gone. He had not been fed on. I'm going to leave that fact standing alone because it's the one I hold on to. It never once treated us as food. The examiner's report said the head injury was immediate, and the official cause of death came back as blunt force trauma associated with a fall and possible contact with a large animal. And for a couple of years, that phrasing made me grind my teeth. Possible contact. Until I got older about it. Put yourself behind that desk. You have a dead man in a condemned industrial structure his group had no permission to enter. You have 3 shattered witnesses describing an unknown primate. You have 2 utility workers who saw something upright at distance for 10 seconds. You have tracks in mud that collapses when you kneel next to it. Photographs that show what every track photograph shows. Hair samples from a building that deer and bears and rodents had used for decades, most of them without roots enough to type. You have no animal. What are you going to write? They wrote what the evidence let them write. The deputies recovered our note from under the cooking pot at camp, and it matched our statements to the hour, and I think that's why we were treated gently. The local paper ran it as a fatal accident during an unauthorized exploration of an abandoned construction site, which is close enough to true that we never fought it, and Nate's family asked us to leave it there, and we have. Cal's boat came off the flat weeks later when the wind and the water shifted. The transom bench was bent downward on one side, and there was long dark hair dried onto the gunwale, and, by then, the boat had cooked in the sun and sat in the mud for a month, and it told the officials nothing they could use. The bow rope had failed under sudden heavy load. That line's in the report too. Sudden heavy load. I could have told them that. So that's the record. And this is the part where I'm supposed to leave you with a mystery. And I'm not going to because I don't have one. I know exactly what happened to us, and I've had 10 years to strip it down to what it actually was. And here it is. We met an animal. Not a spirit. Not a curse. An animal. Flesh and appetite and memory. The biggest and strongest thing either side of any fence I know about. Living in a place that suited it perfectly. The drought pulled the lake down and reopened a network it had known its whole long life. The gallery, the passages, the building on the slope, and reopened its yard along with it. And then 4 men in an aluminum boat parked 6 trout on ice in the middle of its territory. It came for the fish twice because that's what animals do. It stranded our boat by accident and by appetite, not design. And when we started moving through its country, it did what a strong animal does with something interesting, moving through its country. It kept track of us at its own pace on its own routes. And everything that looked to us like strategy, the parallel travel, the road cutting, the patience at the building, the waiting under the walkway was just this. It knew every inch of that ground and every foot of those tunnels. And we knew a paper map. And then we didn't even have that. It was never in a hurry because it never needed to be. We were slow, loud, bound to the road and blind past our own lights. And it had all the time in the world. And the 2 moments it turned savage. The wall, the walkway. Both came after we'd heard it, and after we'd carried food and noise deep into its den. I'm not excusing it. It killed my friend, and I'd have killed it that day with anything you handed me. I'm explaining it because the explanation is the scary part. There was no malice out there to keep at bay with the right words or the right behavior. There was just an animal too big to argue with in terrain built entirely in its favor. And the terrain is the part people refuse to take seriously. So, here's my conclusion, and then my warning, and then I'm done. Because unlike most stories with this word in them, mine actually ends. Nate is buried outside Weaverville. Cal turns wrenches with 8 working fingers. Owen and I still fish together on other water from shore, and neither of us has ever once camped past dark on that lake again. That's the change it made in us. Permanent. And honestly, I've stopped calling it damage. I call it knowing something. The lake rose in the wet years and shut the door on that gallery. And I let myself hope the thing behind it moved on, or got old, or died the way every animal dies. Then this summer the lake dropped again and the road came up out of the water again and people started walking it again, and that's why you're reading this. That road is firm. It'll hold you and your kids and your dog. It's the ground beside it that fools you. The crust looks paved and it is not. It took a fit man to the knee in 1 step, and it held a strong man to the thigh in 3. And there are stretches out there deep enough to take you to the waist with nobody able to reach you. And the only living thing I've ever seen cross it easily is the reason I'm telling you this. Because it crossed that mud on hands wider than dinner plates, straight lines while we walked loops. And that, right there, nothing else, is how it was always ahead of us. I'm not asking you to believe in Bigfoot. Call it a bear. Call it whatever lets you sleep. But if you're at Trinity this summer and you find an old gravel road climbing up out of the dead gray flats, turn around. Not because of what I say lives at the end of it, because the ground beside that road will not hold you. And the thing that lives at the end of it knows exactly which ground will.